all for attending, and especially to our panelists for sharing their expertise, many of them whom are members of the PAC. Speaking of expertise and knowledge, I am now honored to turn the panel discussion over to Dr. Beth Rabbit, who will be moderating the remainder of the day. We are all so most grateful to her for her deep knowledge and dedication, not only to the PAC, but to today's discussion. After a successful 30-year business career, Dr. Rabbit dove right into academia, where she also excelled, receiving her master's and then doctorate in environmental sciences at Rutgers. Continuing to overachieve, she became an assistant research professor in graduate studies and founder of the Rutgers Center for Urban Environmental Sustainability. Dr. Rabbit's research has included reintroducing Eastern oysters into urban waters, extensive studies on microplastics in freshwater regions of the Raritan and Passaic rivers, and urban wetlands restoration, to name a few. She has authored or co-authored 20 peer-reviewed papers and was appointed by the New Jersey DEP to the Science Advisory Board Ecological Standing Committee, as well as serving on the PAC and chair of its Education Assessment and Compliance Committee. And that's the short version. Dr. Rabbit is in the right place at the right time with all the right stuff to help the PAC and New Jersey address these vexing issues. She was gracious and tenacious enough to agree to lead the discussion as moderator of the panels today, and we are most grateful for all. Of turning it over to you, Dr. Rabbit, and the New Jersey DEP team. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Cindy. That was very gracious. We have a few rules for the meeting today. This public meeting is being recorded. We're going to hear from 5 panels. New Jersey metrics will be at 9:30. Economic implications will be at 10:30. Environmental considerations at 11:30. And then we'll take a half-hour break for lunch and come back with business perspectives at 1 o'clock and government perspectives at 2. If these meetings should end early, before their allotted hour, we will take a quick break, but we will start each meeting at the times indicated. We will have introductory statements from each panelist, and those statements will then be followed by questions that were developed by members of the Governor's Plastic Advisory Council. The public comment period after the panel discussions will begin at 3 o'clock and conclude at 5 p.m. And that public comment period will be led by a designated representative of the PAC, who is Diane Gard, a member of the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. And everyone who would like to make a comment during that 2-hour time period has to be registered for this meeting to be able to come into the session. So if you have not registered and you're somehow on the call on the meeting, please register if you plan to make a comment. As Cindy indicated from my background, I really care about hard data. So I'm looking forward to today. As you can imagine, there are many different points of view related to how best to deal with plastic waste in New Jersey. So we've tried to set these panels up so you get a cross section of reasons why people might be in favor of or not in favor of new legislation that would create a bottle redemption program. We thank everybody for participating in the meeting, our panelists and the general public. So at this point, it's 9:25. I think we can get started with our first panel.
I'm trying to.
So Beth, can I just ask one more time, if you are not a presenter here today and you are a registrant, if you could please turn off your camera and mute yourself.
Christina, are we good?
I believe so.
Okay.
Move on.
All right, our first
Maybe let's just
panel is-
ask if anyone has any issues, please contact Christina separately and she'll help you out.
My email is in the chat.
Okay. So the first panel, this is a somewhat complex question. And we set the first panel up because we would like everyone at the meeting to understand the different estimates of where New Jersey currently is in terms of how we process and manage plastic waste, and try to compare where New Jersey is with where other states in the United States might be. So we will have Wayne DeFeo, who will represent the Association of New Jersey Recyclers, that industry that handles our waste. Susan Collins, president of the Container Recycling Institute, and Seth Hackman, who's the bureau chief at the Department of Environmental Protection that handles sustainable waste management. Our first question, oh, I'm sorry. Can we start with Wayne?
Yes, can everybody hear me? Very
Yep,
good.
we can hear
Yes.
you, Wayne. You can go ahead and show your slides.
Okay, hopefully you can see this. If anyone has a problem, Christina, you'll fix it. I know you will.
Thank you. I will.
My name is Wayne DeFeo, as stated, and I'm representing the Association of New Jersey Recyclers today, or ANJAR. Quickly, to understand my background, I'll be very brief. I've been dealing with recycling since prior to the mandatory law in New Jersey since of 1987. I've run recycling programs. I have worked with many counties and states, and probably safe to say that any certified recycling professional in this group today that is on the call has been in a class that I've taught about recycling at some point or another. I want to start by making sure you understand, and what I don't see people always understand, is this is not what we're talking about. Historically, containers were used through local bottling. They were refilled. You'd have to be of a certain age to recognize that bottle. But today, even when I talk to people in New Jersey, there's still a misunderstanding that we're going to actually reuse the bottle. This does not occur except in very, very limited circumstances for very specialized products, typically milk at a farmer's market. The key thing for ANJAR and to understand is these are not estimates for New Jersey. We have done a series of calculations, and note that New Jersey, if you look only at container recycling, achieves a recycling rate for containers, and let me be more specific to say, a reclamation rate. Recycling does not occur until it's made into a new product. Our rate of 75% based on New Jersey's numbers is calculated based on using multiple data points. One of the concerns ANJAR has is that a bottle bill, no matter what name you wish to give it, violates all three principles of sustainability. Let's take a look at a bottle bill in some detail. This is a typical mix of recycling that we need to deal with in New Jersey at the curb. This is typical in all 21 counties. There may be minor nuances here as far as the lid on a container or potentially a number 5 plastic, but generally in all 21 counties, this would be a very typical mix of what we recycle. A bottle bill does this. That's it. Leaving the counties and the towns with all of these other materials that they will need to recycle. Unfortunately, a bottle bill goes after the most valuable components of a recycling stream and therefore is harmful to the economics of recycling. I am only going to touch on this. Others will go into more detail. But looking at only one county and assuming a 70% redemption rate, it would cost the one county almost $1 million a year in market revenue that would have to be made up by the taxpayer while doing nothing to increase the rate of recycling. question was asked regarding packaging in different plastics. Numbers are very confusing things. Just using one state comparison here, we recycle about 75% of our containers, New York about 70. On packaging, we're at 39%, New York at 44%, but we achieve a higher total waste stream reduction rate. New Jersey has a two-tiered system, total, including construction, and MSW. And we almost more than double, rather, New York's recycling rate. And by the way, obviously, New York has a bottle bill. Many have said that in New Jersey, we overcount. That is simply not true. The DEP and its reporting system, the basis of the numbers we use to calculate, immediately deducts a 15% contamination rate when a town puts in for its tonnage grant. Most of our MRFs negate their residue before they report. Bottle bills essentially duplicate and create a new system to do what we already do, which is collect plastic PET, aluminum cans, and glass bottles. Of course, again, we collect all of the plastic containers that are made of PET. We do deal with all aluminum beverage containers. And of course, we have to deal with glass of all kinds. This is just a typical schematic. I'm not going to go into it, but this is how a bottle bill typically works. Every one is slightly different. Notice the complexity of the flow chart. Complexity equals cost equals duplication. This is a typical schematic of a recycling system. There's a reason we use the chasing arrows. Put it out, gets collected, is sold, goes to market, makes new product, comes back, ergo the term recycling. A bottle bill, in the opinion of Anjar, will harm or destroy the economic viability of curbside collection and MRFs. You've just seen one of those numbers. Therefore, it violates economic prosperity. It is a regressive tax. Notice that bottle bills never put a bottle deposit on milk. Why? Because it harms the poor disproportionately. And lastly, it creates a duplicate collection system to collect the things we already know how to collect. If you look at the history of bottle bills, New Jersey's recycling laws, you saw going back up in the earlier slide, is older than many, but newer than most, and is much more comprehensive than virtually all that exist. Look at the years. We didn't go with a bottle bill. We went with mandatory recycling in 1987, and we achieved, through a comprehensive program, better recycling rates. The one thing we leave off of here is that Delaware did away with its bottle bill. The other thing you should bear in mind is the escheats, as they have been noted, the unclaimed deposits. In 8 of 10 states that have a bottle bill, it goes to the General Treasury and does nothing to support the recycling program. In Delaware, that money now goes to support the recycling program through a whole separate system. In New Jersey, we collect a recycling tax on every ton of garbage generated. Generate more garbage, pay more tax. Why? Because we use that money to help fund and improve recycling programs. Lastly, I would say that a bottle bill discussion is doing nothing to meet the mission of the PAC. We don't need help on how to collect cans and bottles in the recycling field. We need the PAC to look at the points here and help move forward. Those 2 pictures of plastics that are going into our stream improperly and contaminating our recycling are a real issue. That company up in the upper left has been contacted and says it's not illegal. We're going to keep making that product, which is a polystyrene. On the right, that company has blatantly said it's not illegal. We're going to keep saying put it in the curb, even though it can't be recycled. So on behalf of Anjar, I would emphasize that we need the PAC to focus on assisting with those things in its mission that we cannot do. A bottle bill is detrimental and violates the principles of recycling in New Jersey. Thank you.
Thank you, Wayne. Now, for maybe a different point of view, we would like to ask Susan Collins to speak.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I think Christine is going to be running my slides.
Can everybody
So-
see the slides? Sorry, Susan, for interrupting.
Sure.
Yep.
No, I cannot.
Did you stop sharing your own slides? Because you're the only one, Wayne. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I did stop. My presentation is shut down.
All right, I'll unshare and then I'm going to reshare.
There you go. I can see it now.
Okay. Anytime you're ready, Susan.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, which is a pretty picture that shows how many beverage containers each of us consumes. This is the average amount of consumption for every person in the United States. It's about, at the time, it was about 822 containers. And that's a perfect representation of the amount of glass and plastic that everybody uses, as well as the different types of beverages. But first, I just want to say, by way of introduction, what is CRI? We're a nonprofit recycling research and education organization, and we conduct research on the recycling of beverage containers and other packaging materials. Our main work product is our beverage market data analysis, which includes the most thorough information available on US and state-specific beverage container sales, recycling, and wasting data. We also study deposit return systems, or DRS. I'll use these terms interchangeably, also bottle bills. Decades of data show that these systems are the single most effective way to increase beverage container recycling rates, reduce beverage container litter, and have many other benefits. So let's go to the next slide. First, I'll start by describing the multiple problems we are trying to solve. This slide shows plastic bottled water sales from 1996 to 2021. So this has been a time of incredible growth. The beverage market has really changed, and the amount of beverage container waste has increased tremendously over this 25-year period. The sales of packaged beverages have grown at a rate that outpaces population growth, with a lion's share coming from bottled water. In the last 25 years, plastic water bottle sales have grown almost 30-fold, from 3 billion units sold nationally per year to 86 billion sold per year, as this graph shows. Meanwhile, recycling rates have remained stagnant, resulting in increasing amounts of beverage container waste, now nearly 13 million tons per year nationally. Let's go to the next slide. So the good news is that there is a solution to these problems, and that is a beverage container deposit return system. As you can see on this graph and the following graph, deposit containers are recycled at 2 to 3 times the rate of non-deposit containers in the US. Using data for the entire United States in 2021, deposit containers were recycled at a 64% rate, as opposed to non-deposit containers, which were recycled at a 26% rate. Note that these deposit recycling rates in the US are less than what we see in other countries. Let's go to the next slide and we'll look at this data in another way. So this graph shows deposit and non-deposit beverage container recycling rates broken down by material type. For example, the aluminum cans are in gray. You can see that in deposit, if the aluminum can is on deposit, it's recycled at an average rate of 75%. And if it's not on deposit, it's recycled at an average rate of 37% in the United States. So let's go to the next slide. For the 10 states with deposit systems, the redemption rates range from a low of 38% in Massachusetts to a high of 86% in Oregon. Some of the programs in the US have really been stifled by the lack of modernization and the low 5-cent deposit values, so much so that they lag far behind the programs in Canada, Europe, and the rest of the world. I will say that these are the numbers for 2022, but as of January 1st of 2024, Connecticut also increased their deposit from 5 cents to 10 cents. So we'll see them in a different category the next time we produce this slide. Let's go to the next slide. So increasing beverage sales nationwide has led to burgeoning bottle and can waste. Based on national statistics, CRI estimates that 76% of the 9 billion beverage bottles and cans sold in New Jersey in 2021 were wasted. That's nearly 7 billion beverage containers. And I also want to point out that we do our statistics based on units, not based on weight, because glass really throws off the numbers, because a glass bottle weighs many, many times more than a plastic bottle. So this wasting is equivalent to the annual emissions of more than 100,000 cars or the energy consumption of more than 100,000 households. Let's go to the next slide. So if we only rely on residential curbside recycling for beverage containers, our theoretical maximum recycling rate is 38% for beverage containers. This low rate is due to more than 1/3 of beverage containers being consumed away from home, as well as sorting and processing losses. And indeed, this theoretical maximum plays out in the province of Ontario, Canada, where they have one province where about half of the containers are on deposit and the other half are not. The alcohol containers are on deposit and non-alcohol are not. And indeed, they have a recycling rate for the containers on deposit of around 85%, and the ones that are not on deposit is around 40 or 45%. And the thing that's amazing about that is that it's a province full of 13 million people. It's all the same people. They're urban, they're rural. You couldn't have designed a better psychological experiment to say, what will people do if the containers are on deposit versus not on deposit? Because it's exactly the same people exhibiting two different kinds of behavior based on whether there's a deposit on the container or not. So let's go to the next slide. I want to thank you for your time, and I look forward to answering any questions you might have. We have tons more information here. We have 2 websites and a free weekly headlines newsletter that anybody can sign up for if you go to our website. We send that out every Friday. We're also hosting a webinar soon on April 11th on the deposit programs in Germany and Lithuania, and there's many more resources available, so please don't hesitate to reach out to us for more information. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. As you might have surmised from these first 2 presentations, there are differences of opinion and different metrics that people are coming up with when it comes to the question of how much are we recycling. So our third panelist is Seth Hackman, who is with DEP, and he works with these numbers, I think, every day. So hopefully, Seth, you can put these various numbers in perspective.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Seth Hackman, Chief of the Bureau of Solid Waste Planning and Licensing in New Jersey DEP's Division of Sustainable Waste Management. Happy to be here today. I could talk to you about the metrics that we collect with regard to both recycling and solid waste and how we aggregate the data and put together collection rates essentially for the department that we then publish actually around this time every year. So I'll be happy to go through some of that information with you. Christina is managing my slides. So Christina, can you go to the next slide, please? So we collect both recycling data and solid waste data. For many of you who know, the New Jersey's statewide Mandatory Source Separation Recycling Act was passed in April of 1987 and established a very robust municipal recycling coordination program. The recycling data that we receive is collected by certified municipal recycling coordinators that are certified by statute through a certification program that the DEP runs with Rutgers University. The data is collected from recycling facilities, businesses, and institutions. The recycling facilities are what provide us with the residential curbside recycling rates. The data is submitted annually, again, usually around this time, maybe a few months earlier, to allow us to aggregate the data and put out a municipal recycling coordination rate around March or April of each year. The data, this is important to note that the data that we collect is inbound material. It is data that is collected or recycling that is collected by municipalities and then provided to either brokers of recycling material, haulers, or directly to the facilities It is not outbound material. It is not material that leaves the recycling facility and goes back to the manufacturing industry. We also take out a number for contamination to reflect that we know that there's contamination that does get entered into the recycling stream. And then we are able to look at sector and end markets for where the inbound recycling goes. Again, inbound, not outbound. The solid waste data we collect is gathered from solid waste facilities in what we receive through monthly reports. Each landfill, incinerator, and transfer station in the state of New Jersey are required by law to submit a monthly report to the department with the amount of solid waste data that they collect. This also includes inbound material and includes municipality of origin and waste types. We are able to calculate how much of each material comes from municipalities versus how much recyclable material also is generated by each municipality. For those of you who know, there are over 560 municipalities in the state of New Jersey. Christina, next slide, please. There are 30 material categories of recyclable materials that we collect that municipal recycling coordinators submit to us on an annual basis. About 17 of these recyclable materials are generated as what we call municipal solid waste material. These are comprised of either type 10, which is municipal solid waste, or type 23, which is vegetative waste. Anything else which is considered a non-MSW is a recyclable material that is either considered a non-MSW or a non-vegetative waste material. The waste class that you see on the right-hand side here are how the state divides up waste recyclable materials based on the types of facilities that collect them. Class A is typical curbside recycling. Class B are tires, concrete, asphalt. Class C is comprised of food waste and vegetative waste. And Class D are what we call universal wastes, antifreeze, batteries, used motor oil, etc. Sorry, Christina, next slide. So how do we aggregate and calculate all this information? So the municipal solid waste data we collect is included of municipal solid waste materials, recycling and solid waste, residential, commercial, institutional data. We then provide a total recycling or aggregate recycling number as well, which includes all recycling materials and solid waste types and includes industrial tonnage. We calculate a generation rate, which is recycling plus solid waste for both MSW and for total recycling. And then we divide recycling by that generation rate to come up with what we call recycling rates for both municipal solid waste data and recycling data. As of 2021, which is the last data that we've received for both recycling and solid waste, New Jersey's municipal solid waste generation and recycling rate is 37% for municipal solid waste and 54% for overall recycling. Next slide, please. What we've been able to collect is information related to how much recyclable material has been collected from each of these municipalities, and we aggregate that data as follows. For 2 of the 30 materials that we've just shown you in the table earlier, plastic containers is one of those 30 materials. There are over 100,000 tons of plastic containers collected for recycling in New Jersey in 2021. There are also for other plastics, which is another material category that we collect, there were over 14,000 tons. And you can see here that that rate is pretty even going for the last few years, although the plastic container rate kind of varies a little bit each year as we go, but stays around the 100 to 120,000 tons in plastic container recycling. We contend that New Jersey has a very robust and strong municipal recycling program, and we would like to see that program continue and supported through the Recycling Enhancement Act funding, which provides money to municipal solid waste, municipal recycling coordinators and their programs, as well as the counties as well. Okay, that's it for me.
Thank you, Seth. We're now going to go into the question portion of the hour. And we will ask these questions in general. And if a panel member would like to respond to one of the questions, please use the raise your hand function and we will take you in the order that the hands go up. Okay, so the first question, which I think maybe each panel member might have slightly different answer, is what are New Jersey's current plastic recycling rates for containers and other plastic? And what is the recycling rate in states that have bottle bills? So each in your own way have talked about these differences. So let's see. Okay.
So we have some hands up, and I don't mean to interrupt, that people who are not on this panel.
Yeah, I think we're going to let the panelists answer first. And if we have time at the end of the session, then we will open it up to any other hands that are up. Okay, Christine?
Okay, I just wanted to be clear. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so in terms of our panelists, did I see Susan's hand go up first?
You may have, I don't know.
Susan, would you like to respond to this?
Sure. So the question as it was phrased just talks about New Jersey's current plastic recycling rate and containers. And I think from Seth's presentation that that's a category that is studied in the state of New Jersey. So that's a category that you would have data for. But the subject of today's meeting is about container deposit laws. And that is a subset of a subset of the data that you're looking at. So there's plastic containers, but then within plastic containers, there are beverage containers. And we find that the states that do have container deposit laws actually study down to the container. They actually gather data on how many containers are sold and how many containers are redeemed. So then you have an apples to apples comparison. You can actually calculate what your recycling rate is from that, or your collection rate is from that. But when we go into states that don't have a container deposit law, the material types are gathered together for recycling. And so you know something about the material type, but you don't know anything about beverage containers because you just don't have the data at that level of granularity. Also, I do want to point out that the US EPA data on glass bottles sold is way off. The EPA data captures about 50% of glass bottles sold, and the actual number is much higher than that. We have been sending in letters to the US EPA for more than 10 years trying to get this corrected. So anybody who uses that number should use it with that caution, and we can provide our reasoning for that and the letter that we submitted to the US EPA documenting the total glass container tonnage.
Let's see.
Okay, Wayne, would you like to comment?
Sure, I can't tell if my camera is now working. I don't think it is.
It is, Wayne. You're on camera.
Okay,
You're fine.
sorry. All right, thank you. I think that Susan's comment is actually right on point, and it shows the difference between looking at what recycling is and trying to collect containers. Collecting containers is collecting containers. We collect all of the categories of plastic. And more importantly, we collect what we can market. We collect what can be done. So our data is based on tonnage. New Jersey has always been a tonnage-based database, which we generate waste as tons, we recycle it as tons, we know the real numbers. We're not concerned that I collect a plastic bottle. I hate to admit that I'm old enough to have gone back in a recycling program when plastic bottles first came out, 2-liter bottles. We had to work to create, and could we get a market for that? And we did. And as plastics have evolved, and as we have more plastics to deal with, our recycling programs, our sorting systems have all moved forward. The important thing on numbers too is to remember, look at the specific state. General numbers from around the country are meaningless. States from Mississippi, like Mississippi, have nothing. Well, on the national average, it's going to drag down recycling. We are focused here on New Jersey, and our numbers are based on New Jersey, on collection for over nearly 37 years. This is hard data. Now, as far as what each container is, how many pets versus this, how many water bottles versus that, it's meaningless. And the key point here is glass. We've heard that mentioned. Just because I collect glass bottles doesn't mean they get recycled into new glass bottles. You can't ship it. It's too heavy. We recycle more glass here into other things than we do bottles. The entire Route 95 reclamation and bridge repair was done with recycled glass from, most of it, from New Jersey. Collecting in a new system to sort Coca-Cola bottles over here or so many bottles over there is a complete waste of resources that we should be spending on curbside program.
Thank you, Wayne. Any other comments on this first question? Okay, second question.
Yeah, I have my hand up. I just wanted to basically reiterate again what Wayne and Susan were
sorry,
saying.
Seth.
That's okay. As we mentioned earlier, we have the plastic recycling rate in terms of how many containers are recycled in the state, but we don't have a waste generation rate for plastic containers specifically. I know there were some entities in New Jersey that were looking into that. There are such things like waste audits that might be able to provide an estimate for how many plastic containers are generated in the state, so we can aggregate that and then consider a new recycling rate for just plastic containers. But at this point, New Jersey has the tonnage of plastic containers recycled but not generated out of waste stream. So I just wanted to reiterate that.
Thank you. All right, second question. And this one is a little more complicated, I think. Are recycling rates calculated on real numbers, like weighing all of these items on a scale, or are they just estimates, best estimates, or are they a combination of both? And the second part of that question, as we try to compare how well New Jersey's doing with other states, is this possible given the different types of data we're collecting? So Wayne.
We collect, and Seth will be able to answer this probably better than I, but we collect hard data on scales. Everything is weighed. We have a total weight stream. Everything that goes into a solid waste facility as solid waste is weighed by state mandate. And everything that goes into a recycling facility for processing is weighed also. And these are on certified scales. So our numbers are, as Seth went through the formula, totals and then calculated. They're an absolute number. Other states do it differently. Every state has a different way of doing things. Most use scales that I know of, but that doesn't make that true. But in New Jersey, ours is hard data. And it does make it hard to compare to other states.
Seth?
Yeah, totally agree. Our recycling rates come from scales. The municipal recycling coordinators are trained to collect the data accordingly. It is a certification program, like we said, that is required by statute. So this is real data, real hard data, and both on the recycling and the solid waste end. And we do a lot of work here to calculate the information from both the recycling and solid waste streams that come in to make sure that we not only take in the scale data, but also consider contamination rates that have come in as well. So there's a lot of work that goes into that calculation.
Susan?
Sure. So what I've heard so far is I've heard about the data that comes from the facilities, but I've also heard that that is based on sorting of inbound tonnage. So one thing that that everybody would need to know is that that wouldn't take into account sorting losses that occur at the facilities. So there have been some national studies that have been done on this, and they've found that those lightweight PET bottles, that 1 out of every 6 of those are missorted at facilities and end up in the wrong bale. And the data are even worse for aluminum cans. It's 1 out of every 3 or 1 out of every 4 that end up in the wrong bale. So the most detailed studies that have been done include looking at outbound tonnage and breaking open the bales and finding out what's really in those bales. That any bale of any material is pretty much going to contain other materials. There's cross-contamination that happens as a result of the sorting process. The sorting process isn't perfect. And when I showed the slide on curbside theoretical maximum, we included all of the best data that we had from any studies that have been done in the United States about those sorting losses.
I think these responses are a good segue leading into the third question, what is the difference between a collection rate and a recycling rate?
That's a good question.
If anybody would care to respond to that point. Let's see, Susan?
I would love to talk about this one because it's something we've been studying for all of the 15 years that I've been here. The very first project I was handed was to do to finish up our study on single stream recycling and the loss rates that occur there. So we do have a report on our website called Understanding Single Stream Recycling, and we've followed that up with 2 additional reports that look at the losses that occur through the system. So the collection rate is one thing. It's what's actually, collected from households and arrives at a facility. And along the way, everybody needs to understand that there's a lot of cross-contamination that happens in the truck, just getting from point A to point B, just getting from the household to the facility. Glass will break, and you can't unbreak that glass. The glass that breaks into little tiny pieces will never be recovered. The other materials contaminate each other. Moisture contaminates things in the collection truck, and then it gets to the facility and goes through the processing process, and that's an imperfect process. Even the manufacturers of the equipment only say that their process is like 95% accurate. And so, and again, studies have been done showing where all of the materials actually end up. But then, because it's an imperfect process, and because those bales leave the facility and go to the manufacturers to be made into new bottles again, for instance, or new cans, additional contamination is cleaned up at that stage. And that's the part that most municipal recyclers and most people in state recycling are sort of blind to, because a lot of times it's going into another state and it's a facility you're not even familiar with. So most people haven't toured an aluminum facility or a PET reclaimer, and you don't see that additional contamination that's pulled out as part of that secondary processing. And the data that I showed you today includes all of the losses that occur at both in primary processing at a MRF and at secondary processing as a result of cross-contaminated bales that arrive there.
Seth?
Yeah, so just again to reiterate, I guess what you would consider the data that we collect is technically collection rates, right? Because again, it's inbound data, doesn't reflect what's leaving the recycling facility. What I will say is, again, that I referenced earlier, that there is a contamination rate that is added into the calculation to take into account the fact that we know that not everything coming into a recycling facility is necessarily source separation recyclable materials. The other thing I would say is that we have over 90 Class A recycling facilities in the state. Those are facilities that accept curbside recycling from residential and from other resources. The recycling rates that we have that are mandated, or the goals that are mandated by statute, are 50% for MSW recycling and 60% overall. Back in 1995, we were at 45% recycling overall and 33% MSW. Now we've increased to 54% overall and 37% MSW. So we're getting there. We're trying to meet the goals of the statewide mandate. Again, the recycling program in the state is very robust, and the loss of plastic containers as a recyclable material would mean a big loss to the grant program that we provide to municipalities and counties every year to improve upon their recycling rates. So that's just something else I wanted to add.
Thank you. Wayne?
Yeah, just a couple of quick points. One is, again, I'm speaking about New Jersey's MRFs. If you want to talk on national numbers where you have poor quality systems in place, that's fine. The loss numbers you're citing from MRFs in New Jersey would bankrupt our MRFs. I've been to virtually, I think I can safely say, Seth, I've been to every MRF in the state of New Jersey at some point or another. We don't have those loss rates. We have highly efficient systems. Additionally, as far as we're worried about numbers, I ran a quick calculation on New York State, which is touted as a successful bottle bill state. 2.4 billion containers are lost every year in the container deposit law by not being reclaimed. No system is perfect. If we're talking about overall recycling rates and the cap that is cited of about 37 to 39%, I forget the exact number that you cited, Susan. We know in New Jersey that there's a cap on containers, but we know on weights because everybody's lightweighting to avoid transportation costs. So an aluminum bale today is lighter than an aluminum bale was 15 years ago. We know that aluminum cans are lighter and you can only compress so much. But we also know if we want to achieve 50 and 60% recycling, we need to go after organics. We know that's the biggest component of the stream that we're losing. I am the chairman of the Recycling Food Waste Compost Markets Council in New Jersey. We know if we achieve a successful organics program, we'll be well over 50 to 60% recycling in this state. So that cap is superfluous, in my opinion. As far as measurements, our measurement says they're hard. Seth mentioned quickly, we account for losses. They deduct from every tonnage grant going in 15% right off the top. I can take you to a MRF today that's single stream that does about 10% loss. I can take you to ones that are higher. It depends on where it comes from. But many are striving for lower cost because we know in a curbside program, if we contaminate the stream, it costs more to process, and that hurts the economics of recycling statewide. Again, I'm dealing with New Jersey.
Thank you, Wayne. Before I ask the fourth question, I'd just like to reiterate our ground rules. If there is time after the panelists answer the questions that the whole pack developed, we will open any additional time to PAC members only during this hour session. Anyone else who is putting questions into the chat, we will address those questions if there might be time after the meeting during the public comment period. But quite frankly, our members may not all be with us during that 3 to 5 hour period. So we will keep a record of other questions that were asked and work on how we can clarify all the comments and questions that come out of the meeting today. Okay, the fourth question, do all counties in New Jersey, because we look at these numbers on a county level, have the same plastic container recycling rate, or is there wide variability? And if there's wide variability, why does that occur? And for those of you who are outside of New Jersey, in terms of population and urban and rural components, New Jersey counties can vary greatly, even though we're one of the very smallest states. So Wayne, would you like to take that question?
Sure. To the first part of the question, I have no idea and I don't care, quite honestly, what the recycling container rate is on a given county. We only measure by tonnage. They wouldn't even look at that except in the report to DEP, which you've already seen. So the short answer is I don't know. Is it variable and why? The recycling rate per county would certainly be variable. Every county has a different success rate. That's for sure. And the DEP does report that to every county. And by that measure, we actually go down to the municipal level. In our county, in one of the counties I work with, we get the municipal report on their success in recycling on the municipal and total waste stream and go back to those towns to try to improve their recycling rate by identifying the weakest and strongest players. And we make sure, because the numbers are fully audited by the DEP, and many times, of course, we tease the DEP because they are really persnickety about those numbers, but I'm grateful that they are. And the municipalities are then given additional resources where possible to help them improve their recycling, and the counties also provided with resources, as was mentioned, through the REA grants and through the Clean Communities grants. But the short answer is, don't know on container recycling rate. We don't measure that way in this state. We measure on the municipal solid waste recycling rate.
Thank you. Seth?
Right, that is correct. And because of the fact that we can calculate the data from the municipal recycling rate, we can dissolve that data up to the county level as well. And so we are able to provide county numbers. We do have a wide variety of county container collection rates. Warren County is 761 tons per year, while Burlington County is 10,735 container tons per year. So it is a wide variety. Obviously, the higher population counties have a higher container collection rate. But again, 108,000 tons is pretty similar throughout the last few years that we've had, pretty standard. So counties may vary from here and there, but the overall statewide collection rate for plastic containers seems to be pretty even going forward the last few years. Occasional blip in the data here and there, but pretty along the same line every year.
Okay, and our last question from the PAC, a number of plastic items are not currently included in the New Jersey recycling list. Where are the greatest opportunities to increase the total recycling volume of New Jersey's plastic products? Susan? Oh, no. No. Wayne?
Wayne, I think you're muted.
My apologies. There are so many people that want to mute me in the world, and I do it to myself. That is the most pertinent question that I've heard in a long time regarding recycling. It's a great question, and it's true. A number of items cannot be recycled, and that is the whole issue here. And this is why groups like ANJAR are supporting extended producer responsibility and truth in labeling laws. The issue is just because it says it can be recycled doesn't mean it can. Just like collecting it doesn't mean it gets recycled if there's no market. The number of plastics that aren't recycled, basically, it's pretty simple, actually. Items marked 3, 4, 6, and mostly 7. There are occasional markets for what we call a number 7 plastic, but they're very poor markets. They're not containers, and therefore why my point is a container bill, deposit bill, is not going to do anything to help us. But the 3, no, 4 is typically plastic bags or films. There are markets, we just can't collect it effectively curbside. 6, which is polystyrene, there are some markets for polystyrene, but again, it's limited, and our law that was recently passed on the plastics, which created this council, has worked effectively at reducing those items. And of course, 7, which is the mix of plastics, which are really the annoying ones, at least from a recycler's standpoint. They're labeled number 7, they're in the chasing arrows, it confuses the heck out of the people who put it at the curb, and it can really mess up our systems. And that, in fact, is a percentage of what goes out that back door, why DEP has to take that 15% number. I think what would help, the greatest opportunity would be to have some, as we are working on, an extended producer responsibility law, a content law, which creates markets, which we have, and for what it's worth, which is generating a lot of interest in different container manufacturers. People who make pill bottles, people who make different specialty plastic bottles, none of which would be covered by a container law, are very interested in meeting the law, saying they have to have a post-consumer content. These are things that would help encourage more recycling. And the best thing, and I agree, I think, with everybody here, I think we might all agree on this one, let's reduce the number of plastics that we produce.
Wayne, I think your answer, we have almost 100 people on in this meeting right now.
God bless you.
And you threw out a few numbers. It's possible not everybody in the meeting understands what those numbers mean in the world of recycling. Some of our information we're getting as part of our PAC outreach, people think plastic is plastic. Could you just explain to those who may not know what those numbers actually mean?
I'm sorry. I apologize. That's a flaw. Sometimes I always think everybody understands. We're all in the same room. We all know this stuff. There are effectively 7 resin numbers on plastic. The number 1 to 7, 1 would be PET, and 2 is HDPE, 3 vinyl, 4 LDPE, low density polyethylene, 5 polypropylene, 6 polystyrene, and 7 others. 7 is the hardest one, as I said, because 7 typically means that the plastic is a blend of multiple plastics. And it's usually done in bagged foods. If you buy Bob's Red Mill oatmeal, it's in a number 7 plastic bag. There are others that are in number 4. It can be done. We're seeing that. PET, polyethylene, number 1, which is what container laws are focused on, for example. But not all number 1 plastic is a container. The food containers in one of my slides, the clamshell, can typically be a number 1 or a number 6, PET or polystyrene. That confuses the consumer because they look at these 2 clear containers, one of which I have a market for, the other I do not. And it really contaminates my stream. That would be really helpful. Let's do, being very euphemistic here, but let's do away with number 6 clear polystyrene. That would be very helpful. Then I would have less confusion. The others, you see HDPE number 2, detergent bottles and milk bottles, neither of which, again, would be dealt with in a container law. Number 4 is plastic film, as I said, no problem. We do have a system. Most places will take that back. It can be recycled, but it's an active consumer activity. We can't do it curbside. It's just not effective. As I said, polystyrene comes in different forms. The styrofoam that you're used to thinking of, that's not the exact term, but nonetheless, and polystyrene containers. That can be dealt with, and some of it's specialized. And lastly, as I said, the 7. 3 is vinyl. We don't even want to talk about that. We don't want to talk about that one at all. We don't even want that one. I don't want that one anywhere nearby.
Thank you.
Does that help?
Susan?
Sure. I wanted to address the part of the question that was where are the greatest opportunities to increase the total recycling volume of New Jersey plastic products, because I think I want to address the question that wasn't asked that should have been asked here. And that is that I think some of these questions where we're talking about the tonnage of materials recycled, it's really the tonnage of materials moving through a system, whether or not they're actually being recycled at the back end. It's kind of missing the point. The promise of recycling is to get these materials to replace virgin materials in the manufacturing process. So the goal here is we want these materials to do that. And when they do that, it reduces greenhouse gases, it reduces the production of toxics, it reduces the energy that is needed to make those new products. And the glass, when glass goes into a furnace to be made into bottles or fiberglass, there's a tremendous benefit to both saving energy and saving greenhouse gases and toxics. When it's being used for something like road base or aggregate, you don't achieve those greenhouse gas savings. Similarly, for PET plastics, if PET bottles are collected through a bottle bill system, they're able to be made into beverage containers again because they're food grade bottles that haven't been contaminated with the additives that are often present in non-food grade bottles. If you mix those things together, you've got additives in the plastic that make it not eligible to be used as a food grade bottle again. So to my knowledge, all of the bottle bill glass in the 10 states in the US that have bottle bills, all of that bottle bill glass is going into furnaces to be made into bottles or fiberglass. So there's a huge difference there in the recycling outcomes based on the way materials are collected.
Thank you. Seth?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on a couple parts of the question. With regard to compliance and enforcement, it's difficult at the state level to enforce recycling requirements. Obviously, the state doesn't have enforcement agents that could go door to door to make sure that you're, correctly recycling your materials. But that's where we rely on the counties and the municipal agents to help with us on that. The county recycling coordinators receive 25% of the overall Recycling Enhancement Act funding. And 16.7% of that is for education and public information. And we require that those counties provide very strong education to the representatives and to the members of their communities to make sure that they're recycling correctly. In regards to enforcement, we also mandate that, through not only the recycling coordinators, but also through the County Environmental Health Act, that agents of the counties also help with regard to recycling enforcement and compliance. In terms of the greatest opportunities to increase total recycling volume of New Jersey plastic products, again, we think that source reduction is very important. Education will go a long way towards that. Many of you know that the state purchased the app Recycle Coach, where a good percentage of the municipalities in the state now use that app to provide information to their residents for what is recyclable and what is not, to improve recycling throughout the state. EPR bills, as Wayne mentioned, are very important to put the onus of recycling back onto the industry to make sure that they're part of the program as well, so that residents know that sometimes materials can go back to the business to be recycled as well. So there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of help that we can provide, but recycling education is very, very important. And the more we can promote that, I think the better our rates can get.
Wayne?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo Seth's point on recycling, points on recycling. Where we get municipalities that are aggressive in their recycling, we have really successful recycling rates. And one of the communities that I have up in North Jersey I work with, their fiber is so clean, and they do dual stream. Their fiber is so clean that it goes right to the paper mill because they enforce the recycling law. Others still have to be sorted, but fiber typically has a positive value. The other element regarding where the materials end up, couldn't agree more. If it doesn't get recycled, it doesn't matter. If we collected glass bottle containers in New Jersey, multiple glass plants to make bottles in New Jersey don't exist anymore. We only have one. We had over 20. Why? Because our cost of energy is very high, and they simply can't operate here. And you have a very limited distance to ship glass. Again, in New Jersey, we market our glass. It goes to different areas. It goes to different uses. We have glass plants that sort by color, and they do have markets and do sell. A bottle bill simply duplicates the efforts we have and does nothing to help us get to question 5 and all of the other points for the PAC. Absolutely nothing. Our recycling rate proves it.
Thank you. All right, we have 7 minutes left in this panel. So I would like to open up questions to PAC members only. Please use the raise your hand button if you would like to ask, if you're a PAC member, and if you would like to ask any additional questions of these 3 panelists.
So Beth, I think John Weber had his hand up first, and then Gary Sondermeyer.
Okay, thanks, Christine. Christine, you may be able to see more people than I can see. All at
Yeah,
one
I
time.
probably, I have a lot going on, so.
If you see hands up, just jump in.
Thanks. And I'm not sure if I'm identified correctly. So John Weber on the PAC. Going back to the original 3 presentations, my takeaway was, Wayne, you basically said we're recycling 75% of our plastic containers. Susan said we're wasting and not recycling 75% of our plastic containers. And Seth says that the recycling rate for municipal solid waste in New Jersey is 37%. So all 3 of those things can definitely not be true. And I'm not sure that the subsequent questions and answers at least didn't clear it up for me totally. I think there's a lot more work to be done on that as far as the PAC. But so my question is really more for Seth or the DEP team. Will the state consider changing the broad across the board 15% is contamination? Because to me, for plastics, that seems ridiculously low. You don't have to answer this right now. I'm just throwing that out as a question. And the other, that actually, Seth, if you have any thoughts on that, would you, any thoughts on that on the state level?
Yeah, we could certainly look into that. I think that's a number that's been pretty standard across the board. But yeah, if there's impetus to look into that, we certainly can do so.
And then the other thing is everything, everything is weighed. I get that everything gets weighed on the way in. But I want to know, is anything getting weighed on the way out? Are we weighing these bales that are actually going from what I would call processors to places where they actually get recycling? Are we weighing that? Because I feel like we're just weighing everything that comes in and taking off 15%, and we have no idea how much actually gets recycled. And don't even get me started on downcycled versus recycled. So is there any thought to weighing stuff on the way out? Because everything I've learned is that the processors or the MRFs, or whatever, they're very tight-lipped about where stuff actually goes and how much goes there, and that's why we don't have good data.
Well, I can answer that in part. Yes, they have to weigh it to go out because that's how you get paid when you go to the market. You have to know what you're shipping, and you're not going to load a shipping container or a truck with bales and not weigh it because you won't know what you're sending out to market to get paid for. It's a verification system. So their scales are.
Does that come back to the state? Like, yes, they weigh it for their own economic purposes to get paid. I get that.
Recycling is not regulated by the state as a financial element, so they don't really get the data, but it is going back to the MRFs. They absolutely market it. They would be out of business otherwise. I mean, I've been to end markets. That's, I don't know, that sounds almost, I don't even know what to say that sounds like, but it's odd, but yes, it's marketed. Also, bear in mind, to clarify on the containers, I didn't say 75% of plastic containers, and I did move quickly in fairness to you. We talked about all containers of all the materials. I realize you're the pack, but we did talk about all containers because that's what a bottle bill does. Does that help?
Seth, we've got 3 minutes, less than 3 minutes left, so I think we're going to give you the last word. I'm responding to John.
Okay, I was just going to reiterate the same thing. Yeah, the outbound recycling is not a requirement of reporting from the recycling centers. I'm sure that was considered at the time when this law was passed. It would require legislative change at this point to mandate that the MRFs, report that data to us. I agree with Wayne. I know it is weighed. We have reached out to some of the Class A facilities to see if they would be willing to report that. In no uncertain terms, that data is considered confidential, and it will not be reported to us unless it's required to do so.
Beth, I think Gary Sondemeyer wanted to speak.
I'm sorry.
We still have a couple of minutes.
Okay, Gary, you get the last word.
Thank you, Beth. I just wanted to ask Susan a quick question. First, thank you for joining us today, Susan, and sharing your knowledge and expertise. We really appreciate it. My question is pretty simple. When you had in your presentation talked about 2021 data for the beverage market data analysis, would you please expound upon that? What is that data source? Where does it come from? What makes that up?
Sure. So that's the name of our signature project, the Beverage Market Data Analysis. We've been doing this since the year 2000, and we purchase data from the same sources that the beverage industry purchases their data from, so that we have the count of all of the containers that are sold nationally and regionally by beverage type and material type. And some of the additional data that we collect is state-based sales data. We collect data from more than 24 different entities in order to put together the national beverage container sales, recycling, and wasting data. And then our package of data for the US as a whole has 40 data tables, so that we can answer questions like, if you recycled all of the plastic bottles that were sold in the United States, how much would that save you in terms of energy? How much would it save you in terms of greenhouse gases? And of course, that uses the WARM model, like everyone does, to calculate greenhouse gases and energy savings. And then we also have a data package for every one of the US states plus DC. So in a nutshell, that's what the Beverage Market Data Analysis Project is.
Thank you.
Yes.
All right. I think we're at 10:30. Christina, do we move on to the next panel?
I believe that we do.
Can I make one comment, please?
Sure,
This
Janine.
is Janine McGregor from the Division of Sustainable Waste Management, DEP. We did get a comment, if we could talk about it for a second. Someone asks that comments be turned off or made private to the moderator. A lot of statements are being given that are not fully accurate, but being presented as fact, especially if they will not be addressed until possibly after the meeting, and it takes away from listening. I don't know. I'll just ask the PAC kind of coordination team what we feel about that. Leave these comments on. Don't look at them. Use
Yeah,
use your
I
discretion.
don't, yeah, I'm not the coordination team, Janine, but I'm not sure that I can fully disable the comments to everybody in this type of forum. So,
Okay.
ignore the comments and
Okay.
we'll sift through them.
Okay, and if you do have questions, just general comments, we're not going to be running down and chasing down the data that you present to debunk or to fact check or whatever. So if you have a question and you want to put it in there, that's fine. But other than that, if that distracts you, if you're someone who that distracts, just don't read the comments, turn off your chat. Because
Thanks,
it's
Janine.
not really the vehicle that we're using to manage what's going on here. We given the breadth of this topic, we really needed to kind of control and the topics we want to cover within it. We needed to control the speakers, the timing, as you know, I'm eating into someone's time right now, and the questions. And so we'll figure out a way to address additional questions afterward. Thank you.
Thank you, Janine.
Thank you, Janine. Thank you.
You've heard references to, and thank you to all the three panelists for kicking this off. Thank you very much. Then you've heard references to a little bit to the finances of recycling and collecting plastic waste. So the second panel is going to look at the economic implications in a little more depth. We have Elizabeth Balkin from ReLoop. We have Joanne Gamenden, who's the Executive Director of New Jersey Clean Community Council, and Gary Sonnemeyer, who is Vice President of Bayshore Recycling. Welcome to you all.
Excuse me, Beth, can I ask Gary and Joanne to come on camera, please?
Yes, Joanne and Gary, please come on camera so everybody can
Thank
see
you.
you.
Of course, if you have
Elizabeth?
if we tell you that you're not coming through, you can turn off your camera if that helps for your particular issues. But let's try to do it on camera.
Okay. Do we have Joanne and Elizabeth?
We have
Yes,
Joanne
I'm here.
and Elizabeth and Elizabeth.
Okay. Elizabeth, could you start by this session for us by introducing yourself?
Yes, absolutely. So hopefully you can see my screen. Is that correct?
Yes.
Great. Well, you know you're a circular economy nerd when this kind of meeting is more exciting than the Super Bowl or the Oscars. So this has been riveting, and thank you so much for having me here today. For those of you who don't know ReLoop, we are a 501c3 organization, and we operate in the US and globally with take a multi-stakeholder approach to advance the circular economy. I'm happy to talk offline with anyone who wants to know a little bit more about our activities. Excuse me. But definitely the experience all over the world is a big part of, informs our work to a big extent. So I'm going to focus on the economic impacts of a deposit return system, or DRS, in New Jersey. We've heard from Susan that more than 6 billion aluminum, plastic, and glass beverage containers are wasted each year. In simple terms, lost material equals lost economic opportunity. And so what we've done is calculate the material and economic impact over the coming decade if a modern deposit system would be introduced in New Jersey. And so what we found in that analysis is for plastic, a more than 400% increase in the recovery of PET bottles. For aluminum, 45% increase, which is still very impressive. And for glass, a 60% increase. And you can see both the material numbers and the percentage in this graph. And so breaking that down, or rather extrapolating this material increase in sort of real economic terms, what that means is New Jersey would recover more than $878 million in additional material in the coming decade. Okay, and that breaks out as predominantly glass, simply because glass is quite a valuable commodity when it is collected separately. And when glass furnaces and glass remanufacturers can be confident that there is little to no contamination that compromises the value of it. But even with PET and aluminum, you see an incredible surge in terms of the economic value of the additional material recovered through DRS. This will bring supply chain cost stability for producers. We saw throughout the pandemic articles about shortages on glass and shortages on aluminum. So we know, and bottlenecks coming from all over the world. So we know that supply chain bottlenecks are very real liability for manufacturers, but also a shock-proof economy for New Jersey residents. And I needn't go into this, but we're even seeing examples of PET manufacturers in the US importing our PET, recycled PET, from places like Indonesia. We don't want that. We produce enough. We don't need to import it from outside the US. So I just want to very quickly touch on this because of the point that Susan so helpfully made, that when you're talking about recycling, the outcomes matter tremendously. In our Target 90 analysis, which we performed for the European market and which supported the very soon passage of the packaging and packaging waste regulations, which are landmark regulations that will dramatically change the landscape and improve the circular economy in Europe. And what we've seen is that recycling increases are important, but more important still are the circularity outcomes, meaning that if you're turning a bottle back into a bottle or a can back into a can, the greenhouse gas emission savings are exponentially larger, and so are the material reductions. And so I won't go into this here, but all to say, what we saw when you increase recycling rates is about a 10% reduction of material, 19% if you actually have circular outcomes, and if you're able to combine high collection rates and circular outcomes, as much as a 41% reduction in virgin material. This is for PET. We have it for aluminum and glass as well in our report. So one thing that I want to make sure we understand, because I want to just pivot a little bit from the macroeconomic impacts of a DRS in New Jersey to kind of the local context. So what this means in New Jersey is we would see 42 billion fewer containers, beverage containers, littered, landfilled, or burned in the state over the coming decade. And this is kind of an environmental impact metric. Why do I include it? Simply because having a bottle bill will absolutely reduce costs for municipalities. In fact, on this point and these other points, ReLoop and the National Waste and Recycling Association, which many think of as opposed to bottle bills, but we actually agree on these 3 points. Expanding DRS leads to increased recycling. Support for municipal recycling should be part of the transition, which is something we can talk more about as it pertains to New Jersey. And municipals will see cost savings. And so we've done the analysis. We have a report on our website, bottlebillreimagined.org, and it looks at the 5 Northeast states with bottle bills that are considering bottle bill expansion. And we estimated what the savings would be to cities and towns if they are able to expand and modernize their systems. And so we acknowledge that there's going to be losses based on material revenue that is now being diverted to a separate collection system, and that because of that material revenue loss, MRF tipping fees will go up. Nevertheless, as you can see here, the savings far outweigh the losses. And that's because cities and towns can save on garbage collection, on recycling collection, on disposal fees, and on litter cleanup fees. And so this is something to keep in mind. People will say, that you're skimming the creme de la creme off of the bale or off of the material stream that goes into a MRF. This is true in part, but the savings far outweigh the losses. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. Joanne.
I'm up. Let me figure out how to share my screen. To me, that's always the tough part. Once I get there, I think I'm good.
You're good.
Okay. So good morning, everybody. My name is Joanne Jamendon. I'm the Executive Director of the New Jersey Clean Communities Council, as well as a former recycling coordinator for over 25 years. Just want to go on record that we are not in support of a bottle redemption law in New Jersey. But before I start, I'm actually going to go back 37 years. So this is when I started at the county in 1986. And at that time, the New Jersey legislature, many of whom were there or still there now, actually considered passing a bottle bill. They looked at all the different states, what they were doing, and New Jersey opted not to have a bottle bill. And instead of that, they passed two pieces of landmark legislation, one being the New Jersey Clean Communities Act and one being New Jersey's mandatory recycling law. This is not a new idea. It's 40 years old. And I'm just going to go and give a background on what New Jersey Clean Communities is if you're not aware of our program. We're a statewide comprehensive litter abatement program. We're a nonprofit, and we provide funding through the litter tax to all local governments for litter abatement, education, and enforcement, amongst other things. The Act provides a funding source by placing a small tax on 15 different categories of litter generating products. This was actually, Clean Communities was the first EPR law ever passed in New Jersey and continues 38 years later. Just for a point of reference, these are the 15 different categories of litter generating products that have a litter tax associated with them currently, not just bottles. I'm not going to go through them all for the time period we have now, but I just want everyone to realize what the funding mechanism is. 0.03% on gross receipts for wholesales and retail sales on all of these different products. And I just think it's important to note the difference, 10 cents, 5 cents, or 10 cents per bottle versus 0.03%. So last year, New Jersey Clean Communities gave out $24 million in grants throughout the state. Where did that money go? 80% of it went back to municipalities to fund litter abatement programs. 10% went back to counties for the same thing. 10% went to the DEP, to the parks to do litter abatement. And New Jersey Clean Communities gets $375,000 annually to run the program. If anybody would like a full funding breakdown by county or by town, please visit our website, njclean.org. It has funding levels going back to 2003, so they're very comprehensive. There was a question, I think, what is the funding based on per town, per county? It's a combination of population, housing units, and road mileage. And I think it's important to note that just for the 32 urban cities in New Jersey, they get in excess of $4 million annually from Clean Communities. A bottle bill would further stress overburdened communities and negate this critical funding that they get every year. What are the funds used for? Clean Communities funds are mandated to go back into litter abatement. So towns can use it for litter cleanup, enforcement, graffiti removal, stormwater management, and education programs all across New Jersey. New Jersey was actually recognized as the best practices leader amongst all litter tax programs in the United States. What are the unintended consequences of a bottle bill? I think there was a comment before regarding bottle bills and curbside recycling can coexist. They can't. Bottle bills are inconvenient. New Jersey is you know, we're not trying to bring about more inconvenience. You're going to get your bottles at home, and you're going to have to bring them back to a store or a redemption center to get your money back. That's just not going to happen in New Jersey. It's cumbersome. You have to have a car. I mean, for elderly people that live in multifamily or live in inner cities, it's just not reality. The time that will be added to anyone to have to bring these back and get their money and wait in line, because there are often not enough redemption locations. It's cost prohibitive for towns. And in many cases, people just don't have the time or the wherewithal and won't get their money back. And those funds will go into the general treasury, where the litter tax in New Jersey goes back to towns and counties. It's a burden on businesses because now they have to store this material in the back of their stores. The potential for fraud, people coming from out of state where there isn't a bottle bill and collecting the funds where they didn't pay into it. The lost revenue for towns. Towns rely on their curbside recycling revenue, and you're taking the most valuable items out. That flies in the face of the economics to support the program. Promotes garbage bandits. You're going to put your curbside recycling out and people will come around and steal it. That's not going to be welcome in New Jersey. The bottom line is the success of recycling has always been convenience. We've worked for the last 37 years to provide more convenience, and this is setting us back 40 years. But I'm never one to just talk about why we can't do something. Let's focus on what we can do. 21 counties, we all have similarities in our recycling program, and that's what we need to focus on. Focus on that, and let's do some more education and outreach. We have a fantastic app that the state of New Jersey bought for everyone. Let's enhance it, let's use it, let's get the message out that recycling is important. This wasn't touched on too much earlier, is let's reestablish our commitment to recycling. I'm going to put my glasses on. There was a question at the end of the first panel. Where are the greatest opportunities to increase the total recycling volume of New Jersey plastic containers? And I'll tell you where that is. It's in the businesses that don't recycle. Curbside recycling is not broken. There's some contamination issues, but it's not broken. There are businesses and institutions that started to recycle, and then when markets went bad, they never really got back into it. I think it's something that we could do statewide, a commitment going back to doing recycling. What would the funding look like if a bottle bill was passed? New Jersey Clean Communities would be eliminated, so that's $24 million in state aid. Once again, that goes out to counties and towns. The recycling program, as we know it in New Jersey, which last year I believe was 22 million, that would also go away. And industry is not going to pay twice. If you're already paying into the litter tax and then you have to pay for a bottle bill, it's not going to happen. So that would go away. There is a report by the Recycling Market Development Council back in 2022 that gives some key recommendations for recycling. I think we need to revisit that as a whole and establish markets for recycling. Infrastructure we have.
Thank you, Joanne.
I'm going to try to stop sharing.
Okay. Uh-oh. Where'd my presentation go?
Do you have it open on your screen?
I think you might have to help me, Christina.
I have it.
Oh, wait,
I have
share.
I have it right here. If you're, unless, go there, you're on.
Nope, that's your screen.
I don't see it.
Yeah, that is your screen. I'm ready to share if you'd like me to share them, Gary.
Yeah. Old people
Okay.
need help sometimes.
I'm here to help.
Thank you.
You're welcome. 1 second.
Hey, well,
Full screen and share.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Beth, and really appreciate the opportunity to participate with colleagues like Elizabeth and Joanne. I'm Gary Sundermeyer. Next slide, please. Vice President of Operations at Bayshore Recycling. I've been with Bayshore about 15 years. We're one of the largest recyclers in New Jersey. I also had 30 years experience working for the Department of Environmental Protection. Over my 45 years of working, I was part of developing and building New Jersey's solid waste and recycling system, so I know it very well. Next slide, please. Really, a bottle bill cannot work in New Jersey without dismantling our existing system, and I truly believe there would be devastating economic implications. I have some slides. I'm going to go through them quickly in the interest of time. I really prepared them as leave behind, but I want to hit 4 points. Next slide, please. The first is what we've talked about a little bit before. Why would we create a duplicative system? And it really needs to be stressed again. New Jersey's recycling system from the very beginning has dealt with total recycling, not just bottles and cans. We estimate that the bottles and cans portion of what gets recycled is about 13%. We should be focusing on 100% and driving as much material away from landfills and incinerators as possible. And that's what we've done since our mandatory law was passed 37 years ago. As was alluded to before, if a bottle bill were developed, we would still need curbside collection to deal with the 87% of the material that is currently covered under our systems, plus the cost of developing an entire network of reverse vending machines and redemption centers. Other work that I've done in the food recovery space, we estimate we have about a total of 6,000 supermarkets, grocery stores, and supermarkets in the state. That's a lot of reverse vending machines. There's no question that a bottle bill is a duplicative system, or would be for New Jersey, and raise costs to towns and to consumers. Next slide, please. Municipal tonnage grants, Seth outlined a bit about the tonnage grants program. Incredibly progressive back in 1987. It's a disincentive to disposal. It's currently a $3 a ton tax on disposal, generates about $22 to $24 million a year. Once again, 100% of that money going back to support recycling. Most of that money going to municipalities and to counties that help fund the absolute engines of recycling in New Jersey, municipal and county recycling coordinators that are heart and soul of the program. Problem with the bottle bill is you lose where the material was generated, the origin of the material, and that's how the tonnage grants program works. Material gets collected, it comes to a facility, it gets weighed, and the town then gets credit and then gets cash back, if you will, for the amount of material that they recycle. So there's an incentive, the more material they can recycle by going to, as Joanne said, businesses, institutions that haven't recycled as much as they should, they get more money to help fund their programs. So losing origin would gut the municipal tonnage grants program. Next slide, please. Joanne really covered clean communities already. It was, what are we trying to do now in the environmental field? We're trying to evolve to extended producer responsibility. We support that as a recycling community. This was our first extended producer responsibility law 38 years ago. It's paid for by the litter producing industries. All the money, $24 million, goes back to support litter abatement. And as Joanne said, industry's not going to pay twice. They're not going to pay for establishing an entire bottle bill system and then continue to pay for the Clean Communities program. Next slide, please. Impacts and infrastructure, absolutely enormous. Again, the state, in the way the system was developed from day one, looks at total recycling. Again, I'm going to say it again, driving as much material away from landfills and incinerators as possible. We have 23 public and private material recovery facilities. They're the places that the stuff that gets collected in front of your house goes to get separated back out to send to market. They have expended hundreds of millions of dollars to have automated collection systems and all the modern equipment to be able to separate as well as you can. The Can Manufacturer Institute tells us, and I think Elizabeth used the term the cream of the crop, and that, you know, I'd agree with that. About 33% of the revenue is estimated to come from aluminum cans. And the next most valuable commodities right now are the plastic containers. Conservatively, with a bottle bill, the infrastructure that we have, the MRFs, would lose 25 to 40% of their revenue. What business, what operation of any kind is sustaining a 25 to 40% reduction in revenue? You're going to basically destroy the existing recycling infrastructure in the state that handles total recycling for an attempt to get some additional bottles and cans. And there's even a question of whether you'd really get additional bottles and cans because the rate is already very high and comparable to bottle bill states. Last slide. Anything that I'm saying here, I mean, no disrespect to bottle bill states. If that's what was developed, you know, understand that's fine. That's fine. As I think Joanne or Wayne had said, the 7 out of 10 bottle bills were developed in the 70s and early 80s. And so in 1986, our legislature knew about bottle bills and they made a very conscious decision to go in a different direction. We simply built a different system, far more comprehensive on the litter side, collecting 50 materials, and with mandatory recycling. The average number of materials required for recycling in our county plants are 16 right now. You simply can't overlay a bottle bill without destroying the underlying system. As Joanne said, let's work together. Let's work together and try to improve recycling in New Jersey. We're not going to do it through a bottle bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. While we'll go to the PAC question sessions. I'd just like to point out there is a lot of very specific information in all the slides that are being presented. They will be available on the DEP website, and that web link is posted in the chat for those of you who would like to find copies of the presenter slides. Okay, we may have answered the first question already. What financial taxes and fee systems would be affected by implementing a bottle bill? And I think the impact here in New Jersey of implementing a bottle bill, at least from Joanne and Gary's perspective, you've already presented the concerns along these lines. Would you like to add anything more? Yes, Gary.
Yeah, I mentioned the impact to the tonnage grants program, and I mentioned that we estimate in New Jersey that the bottles and cans component is about 13%, and that's the highest value material. But what we're talking about here is a system. We built a system, and when you impact one part of the system, you impact the whole system. So the point of our recycling infrastructure, even though you can argue, oh, well, only 13% is going to be lost in municipal tonnage grants, that's not true, because you're going to wind up closing the majority, if not all, of your recycling infrastructure. So there will be no origin of where the recyclables came from. Tonnage grants is gone. And I can't even put into words how important that funding is to drive our programs. We had a period of time, and most laws, when they're passed, you have a 10-year financial aspect to it, like a tax, and then it sunsets. That happened in New Jersey in 1997. And for about 10 years, we didn't have the tonnage grants element. And our recycling rates went dramatically down. It's so important to continue to have that funding source for our municipal and county recycling coordinators and all the great work we do on top of education, driving away household hazard. I mean, Elizabeth mentioned a really important part about toxics. You know, these programs also wind up driving material to household hazardous waste collection programs and away from things like landfill. So critically important. That would be the biggest impact on the recycling end.
Okay. Would anybody else like to add anything more to the, yes, Elizabeth?
Thank you. I agree that the grant funding is crucial. I think it's important to do a little bit of a historical review. When that measure was passed, it was an concession, or it was a compromise agreed to primarily by beverage manufacturers, beverage producers, who didn't want to see a bottle bill in New Jersey. So this was their sort of deal with the devil, right? We'll give you money every year as a surcharge to the landfill material, and you cannot have a bottle bill in New Jersey. So in some ways, this, to me, evokes memories from what I've read historically of the tobacco industry, right? Which says, oh, we'll give money towards programs to address the health issues of smoking. And so what I challenge everyone to think about is, do we want to keep paying to, or, do we want to extract a small stipend to continue landfilling of material that could be recovered and beneficially used? Or do we want to actually, lead to and encourage, something alike to a smoking cessation outcome, which would be stopping the landfilling of that material together? So that's point one. And then the other thing I wanted to add here is that there are many ways in which, when a bottle bill is introduced, there are ways to transition so that the economic impacts, the potential for negative economic impacts, are completely mitigated. And so there will be unclaimed deposits. Those unclaimed deposits can be allocated for the grant money. But again, let's not remember, the grant money was a very deliberate, very strategic, was developed very strategically by beverage producers to thwart and keep away a bottle bill. And the results of it mean that we're now subsidizing the cost. They are subsidizing the cost of landfilling rather than take steps to implement effective policy that will actually prevent those kinds of landfilling and incineration outcomes.
Thank you. Joanne?
I don't know. I'm not going to focus on what I was going to say. I'm just going to reiterate, because I think the question talks about the financial impacts. And so I'm going to stick to the actual question. Clean Communities funding would go away, and recycling funding would go away. Anybody that's involved in curbside recycling in New Jersey for the last 10 years, we've all seen the costs for curbside recycling go sky high, in some cases doubling, just because markets are not available. The cost of gas has increased. We've really worked hard to make it successful, and going back to square one financially is not the way to go.
Okay, the next question. Since the Clean Communities Act of 1986 already imposes a fee on manufacturers, even though it's a very small one, what would the economic impacts on the consumer be if a bottle bill puts another fee on manufacturers? Would a bottle bill put a fee on manufacturers, or would it be putting it on the consumer in addition to the manufacturers? Gary?
Yeah, I think the first question is, industry has already been paying for litter abatement in New Jersey for 38 years. And it's that dollar amount, $24 million. And with a bottle bill, then they're going to be paying for a different system. And they're not going to pay twice. They're just not going to pay twice. And does it get passed on to consumer? Of course it does. Of course it does. Whatever system is going to be put in place is going to be passed on to the consumer. That's the way it works. And it's just the price costs are going to rise. And many states, Joanne, please correct me. I don't even know if they have any kind of a statewide litter abatement program. I know 10 were evaluated in the Virginia study, and New Jersey was considered to have the most cost-effective program, and that's significant. We don't want to lose that. We don't want to lose that.
Yeah, I'll just chime in. I think one of the things when we talk about litter and litter abatement is, again, I want to focus people's attention on the outcomes, right? And so when bottle bills are introduced into states anew, there is a dramatic decrease in litter. In fact, even when we modeled the impact of an expansion across the Northeast, we saw a projected 35% decrease in litter compared to the status quo, which is already far less litter in states that have bottle bills than states that don't. So again, I totally recognize that money for communities is important. These support jobs, these support community organizations. But what we really want, more than we want money to address litter, is to actually just address litter. And that's what a DRS does. So I think we really need to focus again on our desired outcomes. And in terms of what the impacts are on consumers, someone asked in the chat whether there is information out there on how New Jersey residents feel about a DRS. I don't know, but I do know that these kinds of studies and polls are routinely performed across bottle bill states in the US and internationally. And overwhelmingly, the consumer support for DRS stands out. So sometimes it's 80%, sometimes it's 85%. They are always reliably very high popularity rates among consumers and the public for deposit return systems.
Okay, let's see. Would a bottle bill remove the fees that manufacturers pay now? Or would the, you know, how would the existing fees change if we implemented a bottle bill?
Well, I'll just kick us off and say
Elizabeth, Elizabeth, I think I need to address this question to people, to New Jersey specifically, because the Clean Community Program that we're talking about economically, I think is a bit of a New Jersey phenomenon. Janine?
Yeah, in terms of this specific question, you know, I was just looking at preparing to make some comments later on in my own session, but any kind of redemption program, we're thinking, if it does happen in New Jersey, it would probably mean to maintain some of these. We don't know what it will look like, this bill, but to maintain clean communities and recycling tax funding, you know, it might be workable, but we don't really have the information to determine the feasibility. We don't know the amount of money that would be generated. We don't know the amount of funding that would be available for current recipients. And so, you know, so to say, would the bottle bill do this? Well, or would it remove existing fees? I've seen some drafts where it does, and I've seen some proposals where it does not remove those fees. And so we don't know what it looks like yet, because we're not talking about a specific bill. But we would be proponents of maintaining the really popular funding programs to counties, municipalities, research institutions, and other organizations that support litter abatement and recycling and solid waste efforts in New Jersey.
Thank you, Janine. Gary?
You're muted, Gary.
Gary, you're muted.
I'm good at that. I'm sorry. I'll say what I said earlier, bottle bill deals with bottles and cans. We estimate that's about 30%, 13% of what winds up getting recycled. So whether it changes, doesn't change, you're still going to have programs that go after the rest of the material. 83%, the vast majority of it, all the fiber, cardboard, paper, junk mail, all that stuff. We want to talk about holistic circularity and items like that. Talk about greenhouse gas impacts. We should be looking at total recycling, all of it, not just bottle and can systems. And if, to Janine's point, there are systems that will do both, well, that's going to just factually, it has to raise costs. If you're going to invest in a whole reverse vending machine world for 6,000 supermarkets, and you're going to have redemption centers, and you're going to have curbside collection, what it simply has to raise rates for consumers and businesses across the state.
Thank you. Elizabeth, I think our question 4, your perspective would be really helpful. How do bottle bills in other states affect their municipal finances?
Yeah, so I'll just say quickly, I think Gary shared the 13% number. That analysis is obviously based on what's currently captured by MRFs. In our analysis, we find that beverage containers comprise 40 to 50% of the packaging stream. So we really need to drill down on those numbers. But nevertheless, it is a big fraction. And in terms of the precedent set in other states, I want to say that we are seeing a lot of interesting things happening right now in places like Minnesota and Illinois and Maryland and Washington State. They all have bottle bill proposals that have been introduced. And I think almost all of them, if not all of them, are addressing the situation with regard to the MRF in terms of making sure that they address potential municipal or MRF shocks. So I think that's really encouraging, right? We are seeing these issues, the same issues that exist in New Jersey, exist all around the country and all around the world. And there are creative policy-making strategies and legislative approaches to overcome them. So I want to make sure that that is kind of well stated. But simply when I go back, kind of going back to what I shared in terms of municipal impact, there is a clear savings to towns and cities. And again, this is true whether you're talking about a municipally managed system or in rural areas, more of a subscription style waste management system, because you're talking about a dramatic decrease in the collection and disposal of that material. And so this is something that we want cities to understand. There may be an increase in tip fees. The finances of the MRF will change, but there are very well-established tools and strategies to overcome that. And I'll give just one very quick example, which is to allow MRFs that are still going to be getting a fraction of the material that is being collected separately by a DRS, but a fraction will still go to the MRF. And so there are ways to allow a MRF to separate and redeem those materials at the value established by the DRS, which is significantly higher than the value they would get of the material as scrap. So in a case of PET plastic, you're talking about 5 or 10 cents per bottle, as opposed to 20 cents per pound. So because the material is now commodified or valorized, MRFs can even make money off of that material, which will more than offset the losses, the scrap value losses by a lot of that material now going to the DRS.
Thank you. Gary?
Yeah, a couple of things I'd like to sort of react to and mention in terms of bottle bills. Most of them are 40 years old. 8 out of 10 of them are still a nickel. And I've heard lots of talk about it's going to be increased, it's going to be increased. They're not increased. They haven't increased. And the most recent bottle bill, if I'm not mistaken, is Hawaii. It's about 20 years ago. And in that time, the Delaware bottle bill went away. So there's not, some big trend of passing bottle bills. There just isn't. In terms of the revenue, if you take away the aluminum and you take away we're going to take away probably 40% of the revenue that comes to the MRF. And you can't operate a MRF, you can't operate any business if you have that level of loss of income. And a transition, that doesn't, I don't know how that even could possibly work. And so you're going to wind up destroying your existing infrastructure. And the infrastructure is a good infrastructure. It works. Our recycling rates are comparable to bottle bill states. And it just would, there's, as Wayne said earlier, I see no benefit to trying to do this. Again, we should be looking at total recycling and what we have in place and not just focusing on bottles and cans.
Christine, I'd like to jump to questions 7 and 8 while we are talking about these fees, and then come back to 5 and 6.
Okay, I just put them all
I
up on the screen, so.
Thank you. Okay, in talking about these fees, these monies are collected from someone, either the manufacturer or the consumer, and then what happens to these monies? Where do they go after they're collected? What are they used for after the money is in the hands of the government? I mean, we've had a breakdown of how the current fees on manufacturers are used, but maybe talking, if we could, about how are the bottle bill monies that people don't return the bottle, and those monies are left sitting someplace. What happens with those fees?
I'm not really sure we can answer that because we don't really have we're not talking about one particular bill in front of us. So are you asking what could happen?
I'm thinking about in bottle bill states where they have some experience in dealing with this issue, maybe.
Okay,
maybe
I got you.
Elizabeth could comment.
Yeah, when you say how are the monies collected through fees, do you mean how is a deposit collected?
Well, who gets the deposit? Then how do people get it back? And if they don't come with the bottle to get it back, what happens to that money?
Okay, so I can just explain really quickly. There's some great graphics that I can share in the chat from our website and elsewhere. Actually, we put out a global deposit book. So we do that every 2 years. The last one's 2022. We'll have a new one coming out this year. I encourage everyone to look in it because there's a ton of good data and graphics, as I said, that explains how the systems work. But generally what happens is you have what's called a deposit initiator. And this is the person or the entity that is collecting, the first to collect the deposit. That could be a producer. It more likely would be a distributor, a beverage distributor. So they collect that deposit and they collect it from the retail establishment or wherever the beverage is being sold. And so they say to the supermarket, okay, we're giving you this many cans and bottles, you give us this many deposit monies, and they hold that. And then when the customer makes the purchase, then they pay the deposit. So it's been sort of zeroed out from the retail establishment's perspective. And then when the consumer is finished with the beverage container, they would return it as part of the system, either at a supermarket or in a place that has redemption centers or depots at some other point, and they would be refunded that deposit. And then that money would be reimbursed. Basically, that money that's paid out would then be paid back to the supermarket or to the redemption center by the distributor or whomever is collecting that money or collecting those containers. So that's the way that material and the financial flows work in a very broad way. In systems that where we see what we call kind of modern deposit return systems. And again, another resource we have that I encourage everyone to check out is our modern guide to modern deposit return systems, which spells all of this out. But you want to have good oversight and good reporting and requirements on the actors within the system to ensure that that flow of money and material is well overseen. But basically what you can get with a deposit return system, which you cannot get with any other recycling system, is the potential and the capacity for unit-based tracking. So you could know, the exact number of containers that's flowing through the system and the exact amount of money that's flowing with it. Does that help?
Gary?
Gary, you're
Unmute,
muted.
Gary. Unmute.
Trying to be courteous and, go off mute, and then I'm sorry. Well, I just wanted to offer on this point, and I think Janine had a point of, it's hard to know all the 10 bottle bill states. I did spend quite a bit of time speaking to counterparts in New York State, from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, about their bottle bill program and how the funding works. And the point is, like in New Jersey, between the tonnage grants program and Clean Communities, we have $46 million per year that gets collected, that goes 100% to support recycling and litter abatement. In the case of New York, which was quite stunning to me, there was about $122 million in excess receipts. And that says to me, is the bottle bill even working? If people aren't claiming their nickel. $122 million in excess receipts, 90%, or 90 million, I'm sorry, of that amount goes to the general fund, which means the legislature decides what they're going to use it for, and they're not using it for recycling. I can assure you of that. 10 million went back to manufacturers, and 22 million by law goes into the New York State Environmental Fund. The Environmental Fund, though, has 3 pots, 3 different uses. One is open space, one is parks, recreation, and historic sites. And the third one is solid waste, which is a general category for all solid waste, only a portion of which would be recycling. Here's the point. A lot of money gets collected. I'm not sure it even should be. People should be reclaiming their nickel to get the deposit back. And most of that money has nothing to do with supporting recycling and litter abatement. That's not good public policy, in my opinion, compared to what we have in New Jersey.
Thank you, Gary. One of the questions to this panel about implementing a change and having a bottle bill, how would it affect energy use in New Jersey? And what other infrastructure changes besides energy might be affected?
You're going to have 9
Gary?
million people in New Jersey driving.
Let Joanne, please.
Sorry, I didn't raise my hand. I thought it was just a 3. I mean, collectively, you're going to institute a program where 9 million residents of New Jersey all have to drive somewhere to recycle a bottle. That's all I
with
got.
all due respect, I just want to push back on that a little bit. Modern deposit return systems are established such that the collection infrastructure is vast and well distributed, and the act of returning a container is as easy as performing your regular errands and activities, right? So if you're going to the supermarket anyway, you have to buy food somewhere. That's where you would hopefully have redemption points co-located. Even in the case of standalone redemption centers, they would be located in an integrated fashion with your everyday routine activities. And likewise, designed in such a way that if you have a disability, or if you have mobility challenges, or you don't have a car, you are still able to easily redeem those containers. That is actually in our principles of good DRS. That's one of the first ones, right? The system must be easy to use. It must be accessible to everybody. It must be designed with equity and efficiency and access, and it's integral to it. So I wouldn't expect to see any additional vehicle miles traveled if the system is designed well.
And once again, no disrespect, but right now I just go to the curb. there's no driving. So it has to increase. And then I'm going to turn it over to Gary.
Yeah, and I would just say, it's very interesting what you said was about improvements for access. I think that's great and progressive, and that's where we should be going. My family has had a home in Warren County, New York for 35 years. And so we've been under a bottle bill. Now, I can tell you, as it stands now, the reverse vending machine is very often broken, as a matter of fact. And if it's not broken, the line is so long to try to get to the thing, you almost can't. So in terms of like what Joanne said, currently it's curbside. It is extremely inconvenient. And most of the bottle bill states don't accept, if I'm not mistaken, wine bottles and hard liquor bottles. Some do, but many, I think most, do not. And I'll tell you, when we visit and go up to New York to Warren County, we bring our recycling back, because we can recycle all of our chipboard and other materials, again, back to total recycling. We should be talking about total recycling, not bottles and cans.
Thank you. Cindy?
Hi, thanks, Beth. I don't know if we were going to have time to open it up to the PAC members for questions, but I did want to focus back on the enforcement question, because it is so important and so, it's such an area in need of implementation. And I know that Clean Communities has some enforcement metrics collection systems within their program. And I was just wondering if Joanne could speak to that, and and where else we could be getting some metrics for enforcement, because we kind of don't have a lot of information on it. And that's other than we know that we have a problem with enforcement of our recycling laws.
Yeah, just to clarify, Clean Communities doesn't do enforcement other than litter related laws, maybe locally code enforcement, but every town and every county has the ability to use their recycling funds for enforcement. Like I go back, I started in 1986 when the law came about, and there's been a lot of years, so forgive me if I don't get the year right. But I'm going to say in the 2000s, the DEP did a series of enforcement sweeps over a course of a couple of years, and each sweep was focused on something different. One of them was recycling, and they did a lot of statewide education, just like the IRS, you know what I mean? April 15th, it's coming. Make sure you have your ducks in a row. And people were notified locally, statewide, that you need to make sure your recycling is up to par. And there were compliance assistance visits or enforcement visits to make sure that people were doing what they're told. Can I tell you, and I don't really want to name names, that there are large casinos maybe in New Jersey that are not recycling at all? Absolutely. It's a huge amount of loss that you can just go to one place and figure it out, rather than impact every resident in New Jersey.
Right. Thank you, Joanne. I didn't mean to suggest that the Clean Communities does enforcement, but you do collect enforcement rates and enforcement data in your reporting for, as I understand it, in your yearly reports.
Only if Clean Communities funds were used for enforcement of litter-related ordinances.
All right, thank you. That's helpful.
Cindy, I think you may have used, Gary's still got his hand up. I think you may have used everything except our last minute for this panel.
Yeah, I just wanted to, Cindy brings up a really important point. We do need, I think, to do a better job in recycling enforcement. It is something that we need to do. We have a great framework with the County Environmental Health Act to work between the state and county health departments and then our local recycling officials to implement enforcement programs. Some are very comprehensive. I know Burlington County has a terrific enforcement program. City of New Brunswick has really done a terrific job. There's some model programs out there, but to Cindy's point, I think this is a focus area for the state of New Jersey to try to increase and improve recycling enforcement. I don't think there's any question about that.
I'd just like to point out that that the links to the documents that available through Reloop are now posted on the meeting chat. So if you're interested in some of the support material Elizabeth mentioned, that you can access that through the chat link. It's 11:30. I'd like to thank all three panel members for sharing their experiences and their ideas related to implementing a bottle bill. And now we would like to totally switch gears and start looking at environmental considerations. Our panel members include Judith Enck, who is president of Beyond Plastics, Brooke Helmick, who is a member of the New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance, and Steve Rinaldi, who is a research scientist with the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. Okay, we have Steve. Do we have Judith and Brooke?
Yes, I'm here.
Yep, I'm here.
Okay. Okay. Judith, would you like to kick off this panel, please?
Sure. Thanks so much, Beth. Mandatory deposit laws, known as bottle bills, have been a huge environmental success story around the world. After the beverage industry shifted from refillable containers to single-use disposable containers, America suddenly had a new litter problem. 10 states have adopted successful bottle bills, and I think it's time for New Jersey to be number 11. This is a great example of producer responsibility, having companies that produce the product take fiscal responsibility for taking it back, the very definition of producer responsibility. New Jersey can experience environmental success just a year after Michigan put mandatory refundable deposits on carbonated beverages. The state of Michigan reported an 84% reduction in beverage container litter. Other states saw similar results. Today, the highest performing bottle deposit programs in the world reach 90% recycling rates and higher. And I want to just take a minute to address this issue of recycling rates with or without mandatory refundable deposits on it. This is not a regressive tax. You get your deposit back, and it's very workable for consumers. Susan Collins shared some of this information, but I want to put a finer point on it. If you look at aluminum cans, in states where there's a deposit on aluminum cans, there is a 75% recycling rate. In states without a deposit, it's a 37% recycling rate. For PET plastic bottles, deposit bottles, 56% recycling rate. Non-deposit states, 18% recycling rate. For glass bottles, if you're in a bottle bill state, your glass is recycled at 66% as opposed to 19% if it's not deposit. It's results like this that has the world's attention. And New Jersey is not very different from so many other states. I've always found it odd, given the importance of the Jersey Shore and the overall tourism economy in New Jersey, why New Jersey has never adopted a bottle bill. And the major reason is because of opposition from the beverage industry, plain and simple. Instead of adopting successful bottle bills decades ago, New Jersey fell for the industry ploy of establishing a litter tax, which is not nearly as effective. I am old enough, I can tell you the story that I worked on the New York original bottle bill, which passed in 1982. I started working on it as a college student, and it was really interesting what unfolded back then. Massive beverage industry opposition,
and strong local government and environmental support. So what happened in 1982? The beverage companies and consumer brand companies saw the writing on the wall that the legislature was poised to adopt a bottle bill in New York. So they quickly got a lawmaker to introduce a litter tax. They called it TLC, Total Litter Control. It made little sense. What happened is in the legislature, that bill had a poison pill provision that said if you pass the litter tax, it would cancel out any future bottle bill. So the New York State legislature passed both, sent the bill to the governor's desk, and Governor Hugh Carey was very publicly opposed to bottle bills historically. But he and his staff closely looked at the two options, a litter tax or a bottle bill, and wanted to see what would be most effective for the state. And to everyone's surprise, Governor Carey signed the bottle bill into law and vetoed the litter tax. Now, I know that New Jersey has a Clean Communities program. I see Clean Communities and bottle bill as coexisting side by side. If the beverage industry wants to continue to pay a litter tax, and which the law requires, and continue to have a bottle bill, it'll be even more effective to have these two programs working together. Here's why New Jersey needs to adopt a bottle bill this year. These are proven solutions to reduce litter. Bottle bills fight climate change. They create jobs. Just across the Hudson River, New York has created 5,700 new jobs thanks to New York's bottle bill. And if you make more beverages eligible for the recycling refund and increase the deposit to a dime, then the projected increase would be 7,800 new jobs. New Jersey should not miss out on this job creation opportunity. Again, the deposit is fully refundable. Everyone gets their money back. It's essential that returns are made at stores that sell the beverages. Return to retail makes it very convenient for consumers. And now we have reverse vending machines. We have bag drop-off programs. Those are fine. They need to happen on the footprint of the retail store. So busy consumers don't need to make an extra stop. Redemption centers are a nice supplement to that. Producer responsibility. Right now, it's the taxpayers of New Jersey that are paying to collect and process beverage container waste. When it goes to a privately run MRF or a publicly run MRF, taxpayers are shouldering that expense. And a bottle bill would put that responsibility on companies that make the product. Coke and Pepsi make a lot of money. Between the two of them in 2023, Coke and Pepsi made $137 billion in net revenue. They certainly can incur the cost of collection and recycling. The bill in New Jersey should require some refillable containers. Reuse and refill is much better than recycling. And those reverse vending machines can handle refillables. When you put it in the machine, it has a soft landing. We would like to see 25% of containers refillable by 2030. And that's exactly what Coke pledged that they would do by 2030. So I look forward to seeing Coke supporting a New Jersey bill that will support that public pledge. And finally, I want to say a word about, and I'll wrap up, a word about collection versus actual recycling. When I served as EPA regional administrator, I visited sewage treatment plants, toxic waste sites, MRFs. I was living the dream. And I remember visiting MRFs and asking the MRF operator, how is it that you're collecting number 1 through number 7 plastic when I know you don't have markets for anything except number 1 and number 2? Where is it going? Do you have some secret market that we don't know about? And the MRF operator said, I just sell it to a waste broker and I don't care where it goes. It just gets it off the yard. We know a lot of plastic is exported to countries around the world that do not have the infrastructure to deal with all of the plastic. New Jersey has one particular exporter of plastic who is breaking records in terms of the amount of plastic export. That doesn't directly connect to the conversation today, but I want to emphasize that collection does not equal recycling. And if plastics are exported to countries like Malaysia, Vietnam, and Turkey, we're just making their local environmental problems worse. Thank you.
Thank you. Brooke?
Thank you, Beth. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. My name is Brooke Helmick, and I am the Law and Policy Manager with the New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance. A bit about us before I begin. We are a 21-year-old alliance of New Jersey organizations and individuals and are the first and only statewide organization that is exclusively dedicated to environmental justice. We are the only statewide environmental organization with a membership, board, and staff that is predominantly people of color. And much of what you'll hear from me grew out of the work of Alliance members and allies over the years. So first and foremost, when it comes to speaking about a bottle bill, our primary concern is that frontline communities feel a strong benefit and that these communities don't bear a disproportionate financial or resource burden while implementing this program. So at the end of the day, this comes down to the nuance of the details, because it is those details that can radically affect how a bottle bill plays out in the day-to-day or week-to-week for EJ communities, low-income communities, and Black and Brown communities, whose demographics, as we all know, often overlap. So with that in mind, there are a few key issue areas that I want to flag for you all to consider when it comes to the implementation of a bottle bill. So first is the cost considerations for low-income communities, particularly those living in food deserts, as well as those who may be living on extremely low incomes. So although all deposits are designed to be just that, deposits which can be returned, we have to make sure that every individual has an accessible and a simple way to return their bottles and recover these costs. So to that end, when we consider 5 cents versus 10 cents, we need to recognize that a deposit per bottle or container can significantly add up if an individual cannot easily get to a facility to return their recyclable materials. And without ensuring that infrastructure is sufficiently and accessibly developed, we're placing really undue costs and economic pressures on low-income individuals and their households. So such infrastructure should and must include considerations regarding placements of reverse vending machines and redemption centers, particularly when we look at areas that are food deserts. So instead of just assuming that an individual can easily return their bottle because the deposit is refundable, we need to be asking how we can best ensure that we develop infrastructure and pathways for them to return their bottle with minimal effort. On the topic of redemption centers, I really want to highlight how valuable these centers can be to the economic vitality and the sustainability of a community. NJEDEP has partners in New York City and Detroit who we've spoken to at length about this, and they have flagged for us that asking supermarkets to take on the additional logistics of handling and managing RVMs can present significant challenges and disruptions to their workflow. So while we don't think that these challenges are insurmountable, we would posit that redemption centers placed in communities who are actively willing, able, and wanting to host a center is a viable solution for ensuring that supermarkets and spaces which host RVMs are not overwhelmed. And additionally, by promoting redemption centers as a stable way to return recyclable materials, we consider the role of the community in owning, operating, benefiting from these sites, and thereby taking an active part in building a more sustainable future that brings with it the economic benefits and the job prospects that Judith spoke about before me. So in this sense, there are a few opportunities that I think should be explored in support of the development of redemption centers, which are supporting funding for operative costs, such as grants for communities who want to start their own centers but do not have the startup capital to initiate such a project, and considering a handling fee for redemption centers to ensure that these centers remain economically viable and profitable for those who run them. The last point I'll make on redemption centers is to advocate that there be no limit on how many bottles or cans an individual can return at one time. So on the surface, such limitations can seem like a solution to ensure that reverse vending machines aren't overwhelmed. But this is problematic for 3 reasons. First, it doesn't consider the role of informal waste workers, often referred to as canners, who spend their days and evenings collecting bottles and cans to later be brought to redemption centers. These workers earn their livelihood off the collection of these bottles and cans, and limiting the amount that they can return at one time would be detrimental to their economic stability. Second, these limitations are antithetical to the purpose of a bottle bill. If we want to work towards a system where every bottle and can that is purchased can eventually be returned to be recycled, then a limitation may put a damper on that ability. Lastly, with the inclusion and support of redemption centers, these limitations are not necessary. As our friends in New York at Sure We Can have shared with us, they're able to handle massive amounts of bottles and cans at any given time on any given day. So a limitation on the number you can return any day just simply doesn't need to exist. The last 2 points I'll make are about education and unclaimed deposits. So in terms of education, we must ensure that any bottle bill program is facilitated in a way that fosters education and inclusivity. For example, all businesses and signs put up should be in languages that are accessible to the community. Such secondary and tertiary languages may change from county to county, but in order to ensure that all are aware and active, a framework of language justice needs to be included. And finally, on the topic of unclaimed deposits, the state stands to generate millions of dollars from unclaimed deposits. These are funds that can and must go towards the concerns that frontline communities face every day. Community input must be the center of how these funding mechanisms are created, and this can be done in a number of ways, including community advisory boards, ballot referendums, or even less formal surveys whose answers generate the solutions and funding determinations. But most importantly, these funds must be used in a way that the community wants them to be used. This means not just having advocates, environmentalists, and business make these decisions, but to create accessible and, most importantly, formalized mechanisms to receive and prioritize the input of end users, the people that have to navigate this system every day. So those are just a few of the considerations that NJEJA wants to flag, and I really look forward to the Q&A portion later in this. Thank you.
Thank you, Brooke. Steve?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. My name is Steve Rinaldi with the DEP's Bureau of Sustainability. I'm also going old school today with no PowerPoint. So for those of you who know me, there won't be any recycling memes, so I'm sorry about that. I did cut out several minutes of my presentation since I was trying to stick to the 5-minute time frame that we were afforded. So I did want to mention to our first speaker, Wayne DeFeo, that I do remember Brookdale Beverages and going back with my mom as a kid on Route 9 in Old Bridge to bring those refillables back. So I'm probably one of the few people who do remember that. So let me get started here. If you look around your home, your office, or anywhere else for that matter, it's easy to see that plastics are an integral part of our lives. While plastics do serve some good purposes, it is undeniable that waste plastics and microplastics in the environment have become significant environmental problems. Clearly, we need to reduce the amount of waste plastic entering the environment. Thus, today's discussion is really about how we get there, whether through our current approach, a bottle redemption system, or something else, and not whether we need to get there. Before I proceed, I should mention that the DEP will not be taking a position today on bottle redemption programs, as we want to first hear the public's thoughts on this topic and read the findings and recommendations in the Plastic Advisory Council's Year 2 report, which is due in May, before we move in any particular direction. And I apologize, there's going to be some overlap in some of the discussion points that I'm going to be making, but when you have 15 people talking about the same thing for 8 hours, I think that's inevitable. As we heard earlier this morning, the idea of a bottle redemption program was considered by the New Jersey legislature in the mid-1980s. Ultimately, the legislature decided not to pursue this approach, and our state's mandatory recycling law. And as Joanne mentioned, the Clean Communities Law established a tax on 15 litter-generating products, and annually provides funding generated by this tax to New Jersey localities for litter prevention and cleanup programs. This tax is paid by the manufacturers and producers of these products, so you could look at this as an early extended producer responsibility approach. The mandatory recycling law followed and led to the development of comprehensive and convenient recycling programs throughout the state that cover a wide range of recyclable materials, including glass, metal, plastic containers, paper, and corrugated cardboard. As Seth alluded to before, the DEP's most recent recycling statistics are for 2021, and they indicate that New Jersey achieved a 54% total recycling rate and a 37% municipal solid waste recycling rate. Do I wish those rates were higher? Of course I do, but in comparison to the national recycling picture, New Jersey continues to be a high achiever. Obviously, the more material that we can pull out of the waste stream and recycle instead of sending to landfills and incinerators, the better it is for the environment. A closer look at the DEP's recycling data shows that 45,000 tons of aluminum cans, 196,000 tons of glass containers, and 101,000 tons of plastic containers were recycled in New Jersey in 2021. With plastics being such a hot issue, I would like to point out that contrary to some of the information you may be seeing on the internet, plastics recycling is real and an important part of New Jersey's recycling success story. So yes, 101,000 tons of plastic containers generated by New Jersey residents, businesses, and institutions were recycled and turned into new products in 2021. Do these recycled container plastics really have value? The answer again is yes. While recycling market prices fluctuate just as they do with other commodities, recycled PET plastic, which is your water and soda bottles, are currently valued at $240 per ton, and recycled HDPE natural plastic bottles, that's milk, water, and juice containers, are valued at $650 per ton. Obviously, with such market value, these materials are not being disposed as trash, but rather are heading to recycling markets. There are also many types of plastics in the marketplace that currently have limited or no practical recycling markets. Manufacturers can help address this situation by utilizing packaging materials that are readily recyclable and following the Institute of Scrap Recycling Industries Design for Recycling guidelines. And of course, waste prevention must be a big part of the solution going forward. Let's get back to New Jersey's recycling data for just a moment and see how it compares to National Bottle Redemption Program data. A recent analysis which translated New Jersey's recycling tonnage into material-specific recycling rates showed that 72% of aluminum cans, 88% of glass containers, and 57% of plastic containers are recycled in New Jersey. Combined, this is a 72% recycling rate for aluminum cans, glass containers, and plastic containers in New Jersey. Overall, this 72% non-redemption program container recycling rate for New Jersey compares favorably with the recovery rates seen by many of the states with redemption programs. Of course, there are some states with bottle redemption programs that are recovering a greater percentage of their containers, like Oregon's 86% rate and Maine's 78% rate. But there are also some states not doing nearly as well with their redemption programs, such as Connecticut with its 44% recovery rate and Massachusetts with its 38% recovery rate. Litter is, of course, a key issue in any discussion on bottle redemption programs. The online litter studies that I reviewed concluded that states with bottle redemption programs experience less container litter than non-redemption states. That certainly makes sense given the economic incentive built into redemption programs. But it is also important to remember that containers are just one segment of the litter problem, and that there is a whole lot of other stuff being littered out there that doesn't fall under our redemption program approach, but does fall under the Clean Communities approach, which covers a wide range of litter generating products. As someone whose hobby is picking up litter, I can tell you that beverage containers are commonly littered items in New Jersey. But I have read that New York's bottle redemption program annually generates about $120 million each year in unclaimed deposits. With their deposit being 5 cents per container, that represents a lot of unaccounted for containers, some of which may be winding up as litter, despite the economic incentive of a deposit redemption. Again, I think we are all trying to get to the same destination, but we just need to find what is the best road to get us there. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. So this committee this panel more than any other is the one group that can talk about potential environmental benefits related to implementing a bottle redemption plan. So could you talk specifically about environmental benefits or improvements that New Jersey would gain after implementation of a bottle bill? And if you can use the raise hand button, if you'd like to respond, that would be great. Judith?
So not only do bottle bills increase the collection rate compared to non-deposit states, they make it more likely that the beverage container is going to be recycled. If it goes into a reverse vending machine or a bag drop-off, that material is kept source separated and clean, and it gets to a market where it's actually recycled. Much higher quality, higher rate of recycling, as opposed to single stream recycling, where there's a much higher rate of contamination. We know that it's important that the recycled material actually gets recycled, so less emissions are needed for extracting and manufacturing the virgin material. An analysis was done in Massachusetts where there was a proposal to modernize their bottle bill, and it was strongly opposed by the beverage industry because they'd much prefer the taxpayer paying all of the cost of collection, processing, recycling. That's fine with them. It's a free ride. If the Massachusetts modernized bottle bill was adopted, it was projected to avoid greenhouse gas emissions equivalent to removing about 85,000 cars off the road annually. So the greenhouse gas emission reduction with higher quality materials going to recycling is significant. The real potential, though, in terms of environmental benefits, is a shift to refillable, reusable containers. And that is significantly better than recycling because those containers can go around many, many times. And I'm happy that Coke announced that by 2030, they want 25% of their containers to be in refillable. So we should echo that in statute, so it's not left to one company and one voluntary commitment. So I think putting a requirement of a certain percentage of refillable containers by a date certain would have even more significant climate change benefits.
Judith, you mentioned that a bottle bill would be helpful in terms of emissions and climate change, and people touched on that a little bit in the earlier panels. For the non-scientist people on the call, 100 people, could you just quickly explain what that connection is between climate change and bottle bills?
Sure. Bottle bills are a great tool to reduce climate change, obviously not the only one. Because you have an opportunity for refillable containers, which is more common in Europe and Canada than in the US. And because you have higher quality material actually getting recycled, you avoid the need for extracting natural resources and all of the energy use that goes with that. So we see bottle bills as an effective climate change strategy.
Thank you. Brooke?
Thank you. Yeah, I think though, I want to backtrack for a second. And when we talk about environmental benefits, we also have to include the people that are living in the environment. And I think that is a central principle when we're going to talk about the benefits or the drawbacks or the implications, what have you. EJ communities, we can't just talk about the climate. We have to talk about the people who are breathing in the local air pollution, who are drinking the water, who are participating in the recycling program. But to answer the very question about environmental benefits, I think the answer is really simple. The reduction of plastics and litter is good for everybody. But then I think when we zero in to touch on something that Steve said, is that when we send less waste to landfills and incinerators, that really is not just great for everybody, that's really great for the environmental justice communities that are sited around these landfills and these incinerators. The less we send to incinerators, the less that they're doing these sort of negative contributions to local air quality, which is beneficial for environmental justice communities, not just for the amounts of pollution that we're measuring, but for the people that actually have to breathe that in.
Thank you. Steve?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I'm really, since the DEP is taking a neutral position on this issue, I really can't address these two opening questions, but I will join in on the discussion as we go through some more questions.
Okay. If so, given that there can be emission reductions and less energy use, hopefully, if we are better at recycling the plastic we currently have, how do you compare this to what's currently happening in our litter abatement systems or our existing recycling here in New Jersey?
Well, in terms of litter abatement, there's a litter tax on 15 products. And then after the fact, local governments and volunteers go out and collect the litter. That can continue. I appreciate that, but that's very different than when you have a deposit on containers and people don't litter as much because they want their deposit back. And also, there is a resurgence in an informal economy. There are 11,000 people in New York City called canners, who I call redeemers. Brooke referenced the nonprofit redemption center called Sure We Can. These are people who are keeping our communities, our beaches, our streets clean at no cost to taxpayers. So I think that's a very, very important point. Who pays? And also the real rock star of plastic recycling, and the only rock star of plastic recycling, is beverage containers collected through bottle bills. There's no question that, you know, the old version needs to be updated. There needs to be requirements on refill. The deposit needs to be higher. They're just like when the original bottle bill was adopted in New York, bottled water didn't exist. And so it was years later that a deposit was added on bottled water. And Steve mentioned he's an avid litter collector. He's probably noticing more and more of these little liquor bottles called nips. They are everywhere. People are throwing them out the windows of cars. If we had deposits on nips, we would see less litter from that sector. And the mandatory deposit just covers a much bigger universe of materials than what is covered when municipal employees and volunteers do litter collection.
Steve?
Yeah, I just comment about those little liquor bottles called the nips. Over the last couple of years, a lot of that Fireball whiskey bottles were out there with the little plastic lids, and they sort of it's been overtaken now by the Black Label whiskey. But you know, this is me speaking, not the DEP. As someone who collects litter, I would wonder whether someone who's drinking that before going to a bar to get a quick buzz and a cheap buzz, and doesn't want to have open liquor bottles in their car, is really going to keep them in the car to get a nickel back rather than chucking them out the window. It's like that the product was like designed to be littered almost. Maybe it would, I don't know, but as Judith said, I definitely see them out there, and they're very popular to be littered at intersections, I've noticed. And but whether those people drinking those things before going to the bar, or whether, I don't know.
If I could just clarify, I think you're right on that point, but my point is that people would pick it up, and you wouldn't have to rely on tax dollars paying municipal employees to pick it up.
Well, that's certainly possible. I don't know. I don't know if we would have that kind of a canner mentality in the suburbs of New Jersey like you would see in New York City, but I guess that would remain to be seen.
Brooke?
Yeah, I just want to make a note about the canners. We do have canners in New Jersey. They are going around New Jersey, and because we don't have a bottle bill, folks go to other states. So, I think we should be aware that our canners are here in New Jersey, and they're willing, and they're able, and they're capable of running this sort of process.
Thank you. I'd like to raise a question for all of you that has come up as we talk to members of the general public about plastic and recycling. There is great consumer confusion about what plastic items can be recycled and which ones can't. So there seems to be a tendency to just dump every piece of plastic in the recycle bin, which is not really helpful. So do you have thoughts about specific steps that you would recommend that might help reduce this confusion about what can be recycled and what can't, and how we can approach trying to increase the recycling of those products that are desirable recycler products?
The problem is not the consumer. The problem is that the plastics industry has been lying to the public for decades about plastics recycling. And I would direct people to this recent report, The Fraud of Plastic Recycling, issued last month by the Center for Climate Integrity. Just like fossil fuel companies have not been telling the truth about climate change, the plastics industry has not been telling the truth about plastics. Only 5 to 6% of plastics are recyclable, but you enter any supermarket and there are many, many plastic items, particularly film, that have the recycling logo on it. And then waste haulers tell people to put 1 through 7 recycling into their bins, which is wish cycling, and gives people a false sense that it's okay to keep using single-use plastic. And Steve, I do have to say, I was quite surprised to hear you in your comments say the very words that we're just hearing now from a new marketing campaign by the Plastic Industry Association, recycling is real. This is part of the problem. The Plastic Industry Association and the American Chemistry Council and others and consumer brand companies spend millions of dollars in advertising, trying to get people to think that most plastic can get recycled. And it's just not the case. It's very similar to what we saw with fossil fuel companies in climate change. Keep recycling your metal, glass, cardboard, paper, compost your yard waste and food waste, but we have to start telling the truth to the public. Plastic recycling is not real. Most of it was exported to China until China said, stop sending us all of your plastics. Now a huge amount of plastics is exported to Malaysia, to Turkey, to Vietnam, to the Philippines. And I think it's really, really important to have clarity on this.
Steve?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that industry campaign, but I have seen a bunch of things on the internet that have said just what you said, that plastic recycling is a myth, it's a fiction, it's not real. So I know from working with all these industry people who made $15 to $20 million investments in recycling centers, $600,000 to $1 million for a plastic baler, and materials worth several $100s a ton. That material is being recycled. That is real. They wouldn't make these investments if it wasn't real. With that being said, in terms of consumer confusion, plastics is the topic or the area that confuses the most people. There's no doubt about it. And manufacturers are definitely a big part of the responsibility falls to them, because their packages will say it's recyclable when it's not. And that's where we've recommended truth in labeling legislation. We've also recommended, through the New Jersey Recycling Market Development Council report, a statewide campaign on recycling. While the DEP, the counties, and the municipalities all are doing a lot of work and education. A statewide campaign overlapping everything would be a wonderful addition. As mentioned earlier, we've given the municipalities a chance to get a recycle coach for free. We still have about 200 towns that haven't taken advantage of that. Love to see more towns take advantage of that so that people can have this information at their fingertips to eliminate confusion about what is recyclable, what isn't. And, so we are doing a lot. There's also the wish recycling that Judith mentioned. Someone says, well, this plastic Barbie house is made of plastic, I'll throw it in my bucket. It's not accepted by the program. So there is confusion, and there are some real steps that can be taken to address it. So hopefully we'll continue down that road.
Brooke?
Thanks. Yeah, I want to sort of reiterate what Judith said at the very beginning is, if after 40 years of recycling programs and initiatives, if consumers are still confused, I think we need to examine the likelihood that the average resident isn't the one responsible for this confusion, but that industry is. So any recycling program, bottle bill, otherwise, has to start with transparency from the industry and producers on what is actually recyclable in a widespread way. And any labels on products need to accurately reflect this information. And so advocates and recycling facilities who work to educate communities and facilitate a successful recycling process need to be part of this transparency process as well. And only then can we begin to think about adequate public information, materials development, et cetera, things like that. But it all really needs to go back to transparency from the industry and the inclusion of advocates and recycling facilities from the very beginning.
So I jumped over the third question, so I'd like to go back to it. So
Beth, before we go on, I'm sorry, can I interrupt for a second? Somebody asked
Sure.
what Judith, the report that Judith held up. I was just going to look it up on the internet and plop it in the chat, the fraud of plastic recycling. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the Fraud of
Okay.
Plastic Recycling Center for Climate Integrity. It's a really good read.
Okay, a link to that will be dropped into the chat. Okay. With New Jersey, based on the estimates we have, seems to be currently recycling plastic containers. Bottles would be a part of that category at a rate that is similar to recycle rates in states with bottle bills. So how do you see a bottle bill increasing the rates we currently have in New Jersey?
I don't think that those numbers are accurate. And I looked at some of the DEP numbers and they're not granular. So the chances that New Jersey is different from 49 other states is unlikely. And so I urge everyone to take a close look at beverage market data analysis. And that is the basis of saying that, for instance, aluminum cans have a 75% recycling rate in bottle bill states and 37% in non-bottle bill states. So I think a good reason why the recycling rates are so much higher is, as I explained earlier, the material is kept separate and cleaner and actually gets to market and gets used again. As opposed to, you talk to any MRF operator, you see what's in the bins going to MRFs, and there's a very high rate of contamination.
Okay, let's see. Okay. Our next question, fifth question, should there be a program in schools related to plastic reduction and recycling? And what would you have this program include? And how would you, what criteria would you think are needed for it to be successfully implemented? Steve?
Yeah, of course. I would prefer education on all environmental issues, including recycling and plastics recycling be covered in schools. I wouldn't want it just to be on plastics recycling. I'd rather be on waste reduction and recycling in general. And you could have different chapters on different materials. So it's a broader, make it a broader subject. You know, it's something that years ago the DEP had developed a curriculum for teachers about recycling. It's out of date now, but I believe the Association of New Jersey Recyclers is working on their own curriculum for schools. And I know it's difficult with schools that have a lot of things that they are asked to cover. So, you know, it's impossible to cover everything. But in general, I would like to see a broader discussion of waste reduction and recycling, not just a focus on plastic.
And Judith?
I agree with what Steve just said, but I would add the caveat that you want to avoid the plastics industry or consumer brand companies writing the curriculum. There was an article in the Washington Post last month describing a school education program done by the plastics industry, and the information is not accurate. And so, you know, there are always special interests that want to do school curriculum. So we just have to be careful that it's fully vetted and accurate. For instance, tell the truth about the failure of plastic recycling. You don't get that when the curriculum is written by the companies that manufacture plastics. And they never touch on the environmental justice issues of plastics. There are parts of the country, Texas, Louisiana, parts of New Jersey, Appalachia, where plastic production is making people very, very ill because of the massive amount of pollution. And so any kind of curriculum needs to include a description, for instance, of Cancer Alley in Louisiana, where there's a concentration of petrochemical facilities along the 85-mile stretch of Louisiana, and a higher cancer rate than the rest of the state. So it's just got to be accurate.
Christina has just posted a link to that Washington Post article that you referenced. It's in the chat.
Thank you.
I think this question, maybe Brooke would be a good one to answer. Would a bottle bill advance New Jersey's environmental justice platform? And if you feel it would, how would it do so in comparison to the existing system we have?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the latter part of your question is a little bit more tricky to answer because it really comes back to the care and the nuance in what that bill looks like. So if we implement this in a very careful and prioritize EJ kind of way, then perhaps, yes. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, we have to work diligently to make sure that redemption centers are economically viable, those living in food deserts and on extremely low incomes are able to participate in a bottle bill program without facing undue hardships, and that our informal workers are actively considered and their expertise on recycling is respected. We also need to make sure that EJ communities have an active voice in determining where unclaimed deposit funds go. You know, as I mentioned, our EJ communities are disproportionately affected by environmental impacts and climate change. So any solution to mitigate environmental damage and climate damage must have solutions to reduce plastic pollution, must actively center EJ communities. So I think, you know, it's less about, is a bottle bill program specifically, you know, going to help EJ? I think it really comes down to how we implement it, what we do with it, where the money goes, all of these sort of factors that need to be considered beyond just 5 or 10 cents on the bottle. And if we take a lot of great care and we make sure that we have formalized pathways for environmental justice communities to be experts on this and to give their opinion and share their lived experience and have that put into the system and the infrastructure we develop, then yeah, perhaps. But it all comes down to how we do those nuanced details.
I think you're telling us the devil is in the details on this.
That is a much shorter way to say that. Yes.
our last question for this panel. Do you think there would be added pollution from the infrastructure, whether it's trucks hauling movement? So if there was bottle collection, redemption, and would this add to the municipal solid waste traffic that's already occurring? Is there a hidden environmental cost that we should consider?
I think there'll actually be less municipal trucks collecting material because you're going to be shifting a lot of the beverage containers away from the municipal recycling program, so the trucks can pick up more other material. The key is the shift to refillable containers, and we need a refill infrastructure for that. And I also want to explain that in bottle bill states, the trucks do go to supermarkets to pick up recyclables, but it's not like a truck coming from Pepsi, a truck coming from Coke, a truck coming from a beer company. Companies often say to us, give us the goals, give us the rules of the road, don't tell us how to do it. So with bottle bills, you have a mandatory refundable deposit, and then the businesses can collaborate and come up with a system that they want. So it's typically one truck getting the Pepsi, the Coke, the Miller